more than 30 theories concerning members of the DClan, and today we're returning with one of those long theory videos that I know you all really enjoy, but this time focused solely on members of the DClan, since the meaning of the D itself is one of the greatest mysteries throughout the entire work of One Piece. So imagine the theories that could emerge in a video with over 30 theories about characters with that letter. To say, as always, that these kinds of videos take a lot of work, so I'd really appreciate a huge like, that you subscribe to the channel and hit the hype button, and also, since many of you use these long videos as background while doing other things, whether it's going to sleep, if so, good night, whether it's eating, if so, enjoy your meal, doing sports, cleaning the house, working, anything. Whatever it is you're doing, make sure to leave it in the comments, because you know how much I love reading them, so without further ado, I'll leave you directly with over 30 theories about DClan members in One Piece. Well, let's start the video with what I believe is the best theory about the meaning of the D, and even to this day I still maintain that this is the true meaning of the D in One Piece. But let's start with the theory. And it's that for years, Oda has been showing us some small clues about what happened in the Void Century and the meaning of the famous D. To understand what meaning I bring for the D, first we'll have to take a small but interesting detour throughout the entire story. We'll start by analyzing the person who very likely knows the most about all these mysteries. And yes, I mean Imu-sama. And the little we have seen of Imu has shown us many details that not only tell us information about what they are like, but also shout out information that is very easy to overlook. 3 scenes we can investigate. The first is when Imu sits on the empty throne before the Gorosei. The second is when they go to see the Straw Hat. And lastly, but by no means less important, we have the moment when they are summoned to see the Gorosei. And yes, today we will focus mainly on the last 2, with which I will be able to give you the meaning of the D. Okay, right now, I know there may be people saying they don't understand what I'm saying and wondering how am I going to glean such things simply from panels where literally you can't see anything. Well, actually, Oda has done very well to hide as much as possible, but the truth is I think we can find something very interesting if we look closely enough. And it's that when Imu goes to the giant straw hat, several questions arise. Where is that place? Why does it have Luffy's poster? Who is the other person? Why do they have a hat identical to Luffy's but larger stored there? And what do you think if we start answering all of them? To begin with, this place is located under the Pangaea Castle, and we see Imu going down some stairs and reaching a part, an area that, as everything indicates, is a sort of cold storage. So what better place than this to build such a facility than by doing it underground? The sign he carries is Luffy's to compare his hat with the one he has stored. I think we all agree on that. And the extra sign, the secondary sign, is of Blackbeard. We can assume this because he is a D like Luffy, and because later when they call Imu, his sign is torn on the ground, right next to Luffy's. This panel disrupted the entire community at the time, and from there, all the theories began, saying that this was Joy Boy's hat, that it was an ancient weapon, that it was the crown of an ancient king, and many other crazy ideas. For me, this posed a big problem because it's supposed that Joy Boy represents the opposition to the world government, and doesn't it seem strange to you that they keep his hat? It is true that he could keep it as a trophy, but I have really thought about it and it doesn't quite fit with the way everything has been presented to us. And the truth is, this seemed very strange and unusual to me, so I started thinking of various possibilities and reached a rather curious conclusion. And that straw hat belonged to Joy Boy. But really, this hat is nothing important, or at least it wasn't before. And if you haven't misunderstood, this hat was nothing more than something Joy Boy wore, among many others. The important thing is to explain why Imu keeps that hat, if it was nothing more than an accessory for many people. Let's see who Joy Boy was during the Void Century. And yes, to clear up any confusion, I clarify that Imu was already alive at that time, and the little we know about Joy Boy was tremendously expanded thanks to Roger's flashback, where we saw the Sea King say that his sovereign would soon be born, and that another sovereign would be born in a distant sea. All of this happened on Fishman Island, along with the poneglyph that Robin read there. These two people were known as sovereigns, and now their wills, which reside in Luffy and Shirahoshi, are going to meet again. Now that we know this, we can understand that Imu is wondering if that young man has his will. We know that there was a great ancient kingdom that was completely erased from history, a very advanced place from which I believe both Imu and Joy Boy came. In this place, those who already had the letter D in their name coexisted with those who, didn't they? In other words, there were the country's rulers and their slaves. And we know that in this series, slavery plays a very important role, from the slaves in Mary Jas to those sold in Sabaody. And on this island, there was a ruler, and under him were high-ranking officials, one of whom was Imu himself, who had as a slave and friend a man capable of smiling even in the worst situations. Joy Boy. Okay, let's see. I know this sounds very crazy, but now everything will make sense, really. Pay attention as I'm going to tell you how I arrived at this strange conclusion. In this case, I believe he might have taken inspiration from the biblical story of Joseph. This man was sold to the Egyptians as a youth and lived as a slave to Potiphar, who was a servant of the Pharaoh as captain of his personal guard. Over the years, Joseph earned the respect and trust of Potiphar like no other slave. Because of a lie from Potiphar's wife, Joseph was arrested and imprisoned, thus separating them. As an additional note, I would like to point out the meaning of his name, which is he who belongs to Ra, with Ra being the sun god for the Egyptians. In my opinion, in the Old Kingdom, all the slaves had straw hats on their heads, which allowed them to be differentiated from the rest, as well as carrying the letter D in their name. This D would be nothing more than simply Dore, the word for slave in Japanese. And perhaps one day, problems started between both sides, possibly due to these two men, maybe over wanting the Akuma no Mi or the Haki. In my opinion, Joy Boy was falsely accused of treason and this made him explode. All of this would create even more parallels with the story of Joseph, but we won't go into details as that is not the topic at hand right now. Whatever it was that originated this conflict is what created the enmity between Emu and Joy Boy. And after the war between both sides, Emu felt terrible for having to kill the man who was once his dearest and most trusted friend. That's why he kept his hat and possibly his entire body. And now I want to give you all the reasons that made me think all this. What's important is the hat, as we know the government likes to market slaves, making it so that anyone who sees it knows what it means that they are slaves. That is why I think that before putting on the current Dragon's Claw, they simply put on a hat that everyone wore, as there was no enmity like there is now. This proof I'm going to show you can be quite dangerous, as it relies heavily on the anime and is not fully detailed in the manga, and normally I don't even like reading these kinds of things, as the anime may have changed 1,000 things as has happened many other times. But in this case, I see it as something very different because it is such a subtle and unnecessary detail to include that it might not have been added just for the sake of it, but it must have a very clear purpose. And I'm talking about the moment when Emu is alerted to go see something rosy, and at that moment, the manga shows us someone kneeling to deliver the message. Just like with Emu, we can't see anything more than their figure without any detail in this scene, but in the anime, we see this scene better, and we see that person. And interestingly, they are wearing a straw hat with a red bandana. As I mentioned, it seems almost impossible to believe that this detail, so unimpressive and striking at first glance, was placed by Toei's decision. They can add content to fights, dialogues, and backgrounds without importance, but something as important as the protagonist's hat, which was once worn by the legendary king of the pirates, Goldie Roger, I do not think it was something random. And if we zoom into the manga image, we can intuit that the hat is there, but we cannot be certain because this person appears completely shaded. It seems that Oda did not want to show it in the manga, but I think he passed the information to Toei to place it there subtly. So subtly that to this day, after asking many people about this scene, only one person mentioned that it seemed familiar, but never gave it the slightest importance. This surprised me a lot since I haven't seen anyone talk about this scene on the internet, and if you've seen it out there, please let me know because I would like to know more about the topic. In this way, we see that the slaves of the ancient kingdom carried both the D and the straw hat. Why did someone continue wearing the hat, and why did some families not hide the D? To answer this, we must first answer why you would hide the D. The most logical thought is that the D were annihilated and persecuted by the world government. That's what everyone who hid the D from their names thought. But for me, this goes much further, thanks to this mysterious person who went to talk to Emu. The people with the D were captured and returned to serve their masters from the ancient kingdom. All this happened before or even during the Void Century. After having recaptured so many D, the government calmed down and stopped the hunt. But the world didn't know this, so the former slaves mostly remained hidden in many of the families that concealed their names, like the Trafalgar family, who were able to continue passing down the legacy by secretly naming their children with the D. This way, only they would know and could maintain the legacy for centuries. With the strong waves that were created in the world, many alarms were raised in different places by the world government. They were frightened to see a D displaying their initial without hesitation and stirring things up globally. This caused many families to start showing their full name, as they saw there was a major criminal with the D who was not annihilated and erased from history. All this led to another D making noise worldwide, this being Goldie Roger. The government did not consider censoring Roger's name at first, but upon seeing all that he achieved, they feared the resurgence of the D. And not long after, Dragon began his journeys, liberating towns from the power of the world government and creating the famous Revolutionary Army. Currently, we have Luffy, who not only does not hide his D, but his trademark is the straw hat of those same slaves. And the thing is, think about it, Luffy has no idea about all this, and the world government and the families that have passed down through history from generation to generation are stupefied by each action the rubber boy takes around the world. For this reason, he wanted to compare the hat because he couldn't believe that this was real, that someone was reigniting the flames of the rebel slaves. This is why I believe his bounty increased so much after going for Big Mom. They considered him a real threat, not just for everything he had done before, but because he was a D with the hat, and he was doing it, and they fear he might be seeking revenge without knowing that he just wants to be free and eat meat. All this because a D decided not to hide his name and went out to sea with the hat, using it as a message to the then newly created world government, something like saying, "I do not fear you, we are here and we will regain our freedom someday, just wait." The D that Roger was waiting for was none other than the one capable of fulfilling this mission, carrying the name and the hat. Because besides, when Roger returned from Laughtale, we saw that he spoke with Shanks and asked him a question, to which the answer made Shanks cry, because it meant that Shanks could not follow Roger's dreams. I believe that at Laughtale, Roger discovered everything that also included a prophecy mentioning a brave D wearing the hat and freeing the entire world. So he told young Shanks, who surely spent his days encouraging his captain, his mentor, and his father figure, saying that he would take charge of freeing the world, that he would be the one to finish the task. So Shanks went to ask if he discovered anything about the world's past, to which Roger responded with a simple, "Yes, I'm sorry kid, but it seems you won't be able to follow my ideals," or something similar. This is why Shanks fervently sought a D who could wear the hat. He surely imagined that Roger's son would be in the East Blue, as he possibly knew from Rayleigh that he wanted to have one, and imagined that Garp, who was from the East Blue, would have secretly taken care of him, just like Roger did with baby Shanks. Therefore, I believe his mission was to search island by island to find Roger's son to try to give him his father's hat. But this took a big turn as he met Luffy and saw the living image of his captain, even saying the same words. Luckily, because if it had been Ace, he would have said that it was Roger's and would have burned it in 2 seconds. But going back to the topic, I still have a little more to tell you, and it is that I would like to comment on how all the Ds have a strong sense of freedom inherited from the Void Century and the hundreds of prisoners in Mary Jas. And each has it in their own way, but we see how they all fight for that feeling of freedom that the slaves themselves had. Without going into much detail, and to finish this part, I would like to point out that many of the D concealed their initials and spread throughout the world. An example of this could be the people of Wano, especially the noble families. This would completely explain Momonosuke's attitude, alongside Luffy, Roger, and very possibly Trafalgar Law upon arriving in the land of Zu. And if we remember when Zunesha starts talking to Momonosuke and Luffy, we see Law hesitating a bit, and then, in fact, he disappears from the scene. All this happens until the conversation ends. Oda very likely did this on purpose to hide his suffering, and in this way make us confused and think it's some kind of form of haki from Zunesha, when simply being a D would be something hereditary. Something like how it is considered that the king's haki can also have a strong hereditary factor. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense that the Kozuki share blood with the D-clan. Only they could notice that voice, and both Oden and Suiko sensed it much more strongly than the rest, with Luffy feeling that Zunesha would not follow his order. But we see that this is very simple, and this ability would simply be hereditary. And it is because the Kozuki, who have lived in a completely closed country and thus less exposed to mixing their DNA with people outside the clan, especially if they only married among nobles and families, would explain why they have such a strong lineage. And it is because the very nobles of Wano would be descendants of the same slaves. In this way, Oda would once again be hiding something in plain sight and making what we believe have a completely different meaning. Besides, the hairstyle of the Tenryubido is most likely based on the movie The Adventures of Baron Munchausen. I won't go into details about the movie, but I will comment that I think the slaves also have it, as this is a typical hairstyle of the king. This way they would have the hairstyle doubled forward. And something like that is very similar to the typical ancient hairstyles in Japan, which could mean that by having closed off Wano, they did not adopt external cultures. And this bun has almost, well, not changed since then. I think they shared the hairstyle because it was the insignia of the ancient kingdom. If we look closely, it could be said that this hairstyle resembles the tail of a great whale entering the water. I think they had a great love for these animals, mainly island whales, which might place the ancient kingdom in the West Blue, since these whales originate there, also being the sea where Ohara was located. What a coincidence! When the survivors from the first time in the story of the ancient kingdom went to sea, they went with an allied tribe that helped them in the war, the Mink. Once in their country, they shaped a tree in the form of a whale to show that they were allies, and they gave them a road poneglyph and placed the Kozuki emblem, and in fact, the road poneglyph is right at the whale's tail, like the hairstyle. It seems like quite a coincidence to me. I told you I also think I know the name of the ancient kingdom, a kingdom that had the keys to all this, most likely due to the intelligence and work of the slaves. This kingdom had a name that even the Gorosei wanted to prevent from being heard by CP9, who was sent to Ohara, and indeed, if they were going to kill them, it didn't matter if they said it. Only the allies of the world government could leave with that information, and the Gorosei were concerned that Spandam would hear it because its name meant a lot and could cause many problems if known. The name that this kingdom had would shock Spandam and the readers themselves, as it was a name we all knew too well, and that's because the name of that kingdom was none other than Mary Jas. That's right, that kingdom had the same name as where the celestial dragons now live. But why do they share a name? What does it mean that the ancient kingdom was called that? And why did they adopt the same name? And who created the new Mary Jas? And all these questions were what the Gorosei feared Spandam would ask. And now I am going to answer all these questions. It was a very beloved country for the slave owners. When it was corrupted by the D's, they decided to completely destroy this country and created a new nation, a new pure and immaculate nation at the highest point of the earth, along with all the noble families of the world that supported them, except for the Nefertari family, which decided to stay in Arabasta. For this reason, I believe that the Kozuki are descendants of the D's. Runaways from the kingdom that existed, specifically being a family related to birds. And we have seen how some have uncommon names, like monkey, jaguar, Trafalgar, rocks, etc. This completely sounds to me like each family either specialized in what their name says, or served families with that name, as if we say that Luffy's ancestors were the monkeys, thus making Luffy the slave D of the monkeys. The birds, as I mentioned before, would be the ancestors of the Kozuki, and this is because their emblem is a bird. If it were me, I would want to keep the name in some way to the old name I had to discard, and what better way than to use it as an emblem for future generations. I also came across other possible Ds, and again it sounds crazy, and some would be the Jetty Cool brothers. Yes, do you remember those two who appeared out of nowhere? Well, these guys wore a hat very similar to that of our protagonist, and interestingly, it was larger in size and found in an icy area. And now is when we return to the topic I mentioned at the beginning in what could be considered giant quotes. And it's true that the hat that Emu keeps is indeed large, but the anime exaggerated its size a lot, and because of that, we might have an incorrect idea of their bodies. And if we reduce their size a bit to match the mangas, we have a size much closer to the hat that is kept and could belong to Joy Boy. Could it be that Joy Boy was from this strange race of giants? Well, I think so. And I will explain my reasons, and it is that the Yeti Cool brothers appeared for the first time in the last panel of chapter 665, but they did not become prominent until 666, titled with their name, Yeti Cool Brothers. Curious that the first time we see a race that could be that of Joy Boy, the natural enemy of the gods, they are introduced in chapter 666. Which would be the number of the beast, the number of the demon. On top of that, it turns out that this hat is kept in a freezer, and although it could be used for more things, the hat could see them drawn without suffering the effects of the cold. For this reason, I think Oda decided to do it this way as a nod so that later on we can say he dropped a hint so long ago and wonder how we hadn't seen it before. And it's not just that these two brothers wore those hats, but they were called Yetis, which are known for resembling apes a lot. You might wonder if it has any importance that they resemble apes, and I'll tell you that, just like with the name of the ancient kingdom, we've seen it before. And when we went up to Scipioea and saw Roger arrive, we saw a large bell tower that had some monkeys engraved with the hat. At first I thought it was a prophecy about Monkey D. Luffy, but after talking with a friend, she told me it seemed like a myth to her. This way, I came to the conclusion that yes, they were literal drawings, but not about a monkey king, rather about a very important man who fought in the Great War against the world government, the giant ape Joy Boy. Therefore, as a final conclusion, the D lived in the ancient kingdom and were the slaves, bearing both the letter in their name and the straw hats as their mark of slavery. And after a conflict with their masters, they were captured and enslaved again in Mary Jas. Some escaped and decided to hide everything from the past, and many of them could have ended up in Wano. The meaning of the D would be Dore, which is slave in Japanese. And one of those who escaped never hid anything, and his hat has traveled for 800 years or more. They continued creating more within their family up to today, which is worn by Monkey D. Luffy, and the ancient kingdom shares a name with the new Mary Jas, which was created by the winners of the war to keep what their slaves took from them, and I believe that Joy Boy was from the race of the Jetty Cool brothers. So this would be my theory about the D, and I know that more than one of you are now completely freaking out, saying how is this possible? What an incredible theory. I know there will be people thinking that you already know the meaning of the D, and I feel the same way. I love the fact that the D is Dore, that they are slaves. It all fits for me. It makes perfect sense. And as I say, that scene where someone with a straw hat comes to call Emu and treats him as if he were his slave, it fits perfectly. So that would be the first theory. And let's move on to the second. The D, who was this clan or family? Why are the government and especially Emu so obsessed with them? What is the word behind this letter? With all of this, it is clear that Aichi Oda, from the very beginning of the work, and even Oda's first editor, revealed the initial ideas of the work. The sketches and concepts where we can see that the first drawing of who would become Luffy had a headscarf with the Gomu Gomu pattern. And most importantly, that character was named Monkey D. Pow. This lets us understand that from the earliest moments of One Piece, the D, its presence, and the mystery were already in Oda's plans, long before the name Luffy even existed, although we will leave this for another time, because these were not the only things this editor revealed. All this information reinforces that the mystery of the D is not something improvised, but a fundamental piece of the lore. Oda has been preparing its revelation for decades. But what if I told you I think I have discovered the meaning behind the D? And I have done it using hidden clues, folklore, ancient religions, and symbology. And I have reached a point you have probably never heard before. The D does not mean dreamer, nor crescent, nor anything. The D means... wait, I can't tell you yet. First, we need two things. One, that I explain why you've probably never heard this meaning and it makes sense. And two, that you subscribe to the channel. So now let's start from the beginning. First, we'll talk about the Noah's Ark Joy Boy. We go back to Fishman Island. There they show us a sacred, gigantic vessel from the Void Century, the Noah Ark. Does that name ring a bell? It is exactly like Noah's Ark. Plus, it's called Ark. And visually, it also greatly resembles how Noah's Ark is depicted in Western iconography and drawings. And according to King Neptune, in chapter 649, the Noah Ark was built 900 years ago to fulfill a promise from Joy Boy. It was designed to transport the people of Gyojin Island to the surface, and Joy Boy was unable to fulfill his promise, leaving an apology letter on a poneglyph. Does that ring a bell? In the Bible, Noah builds an ark by God's order to save humanity and animals from a universal flood. Joy Boy built an ark, or helped to do so, to save his people. But from what? The next thing we'll talk about is the attack by Imu, and we jump to Lulusia. Imu launches a devastating attack on the kingdom of Lulusia, and the sky darkens. Lightning strikes. The entire island disappears from the map. All this points to it being Uranus, one of the three ancient weapons. In the same way, Dragon and the Revolutionary Army theorized it, and that this would be activated with a replica of the Mother Flame that Vegapunk was developing, and that was only a partial replica. Vegapunk claims that not even that complete replica could compare to the original, and even so, its power is enough to cause two effects. One, the total and instant destruction of the island, and two, the rise of the sea level by 1 to 2 meters worldwide. This connects us with Vegapunk's posthumous message, and this is where he gave us the major information that 900 years ago there was a great flood caused by the use of ancient weapons during the Great War that occurred in the Void Century, which caused the sea level to rise by up to 200 meters, devastating and leaving approximately 80% of the land surface completely flooded. A catastrophe without preamble. Let's move on to the next. Technology and longevity and the meaning of life. And how is it possible that a society almost a century ago had a scientific and military level so high and immensely superior to the current one? So much so that Vegapunk confirmed this, and in fact, claims that not even he, who is the greatest genius in the world of One Piece, can replicate it. All these points remind me of a specific book, the Bible. And here we come to the big revelation. The D stands for Diluvian. This is a word that exists in both English and Spanish and refers to something related to the Great Flood. It can be before or after it, but it always surrounds it. And this is very important. Why? Pay attention. The flood in the Bible was caused by God. The self-proclaimed gods are the ones trying to hide this information and who seem to have a power that would result in the rising sea levels, as happened with Lulusia. So, the flood was not a normal rain of water, but rather a large-scale attack, where countless lightning bolts poured down precisely, caused by the weapon Imu had in their hands, which would be Uranus, using the energy of the Mother Flame, thus generating an artificial flood with practically the same consequences as the one in the Bible. Additionally, in Genesis 5:32, it is said that Adam lived 930 years. Humans before the biblical flood were described as long-lived, wise, and capable of great works. In One Piece, the only character confirmed as a survivor from the Void Century is Imu, with over 800 years. Also Zunesha, who is condemned to wander the world since before that era. curious. And if the humans of the Void Century were like those from Genesis, more intelligent, more long-lived, more advanced, and that's why they were destroyed. And wait, are there more correlations with the Bible, since humans, being more intelligent and long-lived, reached a higher technological development that led them to wars and also to evil? And we just have to remember the Tower of Babel, which was said to reach the sky in height. That is why God wanted to restart the earth, as mentioned in Genesis. And the Lord saw that the wickedness of humanity was great on the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil. And the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the man I have created, from man to livestock, reptiles, and the birds of the sky, for I am grieved to have created them. In the case of One Piece, we do not have a figure of a creator god, but there is the self-proclamation of being one, as is the case with the Tenryubito. It's not the first time they've made such a claim, and well, as they say in the World 2 of the mural, they killed the sun and called themselves gods. This implies a confrontation between what is said to be right or should be followed as a norm or law, and also the freedom for which Joy Boy fought, applying this divine punishment against the revolution of all these races, concluding with the attempt to end those who opposed them. This global catastrophe ended up being caused. And why would this make sense? Because in the Bible, 1, the flood was sent by God to purge evil, and 2, humans had strayed and taken the wrong path according to God's law, corrupting the world. 3, God decided to destroy everything and start anew. And in One Piece, the Tenryubito call themselves gods. Imu seems to have the power to restart the world. And 3, Joy Boy and the Ancient Kingdom were a threat to their order. Or with an artificial flood with impossible technology, the Mother Flame. The Mother Flame plus Uranus. And watch out, because there's more. Let's talk about Emmeth. Remember the giant iron robot, the one that activated upon hearing the drums of liberation and was created in the Void Century and attacked Mary Jas in the past? It's called Emmeth. Emmeth is a Hebrew word that means truth. In the Jewish legend of the Golem of Prague, the word Emmeth was written on the golem's forehead to give it life. If the first letter was erased, it became Met, death. Oda does not choose names randomly. That robot has been waiting centuries to awaken, just like the truth of the world. Emmeth represents the dormant truth that Joy Boy left behind and the mission entrusted to him. Now let's go to the giants, the Nephilim, and the Bible. Because, in addition, there's something that has always seemed curious to us, and that is that there are D who are also giants. Something that can be surprising because it would break that possible family or clan relationship by being different races. But let's go back to the Bible before the flood. If we read Genesis 6:4, it says the following: there were giants on the earth in those days. It correlates again with biblical texts. Before the flood, it would explain why there are people from the D family as giants, like Jaguar and Saul. Furthermore, in Elbaf, we have already seen marriage and having a child between a human and a giant. Gaban Giga Chad, they took the sons of God, the daughters of men, and they bore them children. These were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. There are many interpretations, but one of the most interesting for the story is the mix between fallen angels or deities with humans, explaining ancient myths and legends. And we have a hybrid race about which we know nothing, but which has always been hunted and enslaved by the world government to the point of near extinction. And yes, I am talking about the Buccaneers. The community has typically thought that the Buccaneers are a mix between giants and humans, but recently we've seen a child from both races that does not generate a new one, as in the case of Scopper Gaban and Red. Now then, is there another race with great resilience, greater power, strength, and dark skin? Yes, those formerly considered and called gods who lived on the Red Line, the Lunarians. And if the Buccaneers are a mix between humans and the ancient gods of that time, it would maintain the thread explained so far, explain the race of the Buccaneers, and align again with the Bible, explaining the reason for the hatred and persecution by the world government, just as they did with the Lunarians. Everything fits. Conclusion: we have an advanced civilization destroyed by a flood caused by the self-proclaimed gods. Then we have an ark that sought to save an oppressed race. Then we have giants or similar races that could have been purged. Then we have a universal flood, also a Hebrew word written by a robot 900 years ago that only awakens with the truth and also direct correlations with the Bible and the events of One Piece. And everything points to the fact that the bearers of D are not simply rebels or pirates with luck and power. They are the heirs of the world before the flood. That's why they hate them. That's why they are the natural enemy of the gods. That's why it has been said several times in the work that the D always brings the storm. And if Joy Boy was the Noah of his time, then Luffy is the flood of this era. And this would be the second theory indicating that the D means Diluvian. I really like the whole theme of the relationship with the Bible because it's clear there could be a strong connection. Obviously, we know that Oda is a very intelligent person who loves to have everything connected, and it could be Diluvian. And it seems like a very original and very interesting theory to me, so that's why we bring it. Let's move on to the third one. And with the third theory, we are gonna go with one of the most famous, most well-known by the entire One Piece community, and at the same time, one of the simplest, since we are not gonna focus on parallels with other works. We are not going to focus on parallels with other stories, and we are not going to dig through the manga for specific dialogues or things, but we are going to go to a more general level. But on the other hand, this theory is well supported, fits well with the work, and is probably something you've all heard or thought of. And if not, let me know in the comments because I'd be surprised. The theory is simply and plainly that the letter D means a smile. That is, when we take the D and turn it around, we see a smile. So basically, that is what the D would mean. I know there will be people who don't agree at all and think that this doesn't make sense, but it's true that throughout the work of One Piece, we've seen certain arguments and certain things that could make us think that this might be real. And in fact, I would tell you that this theory, despite being many years old, as the manga has progressed specifically since the Wano arc, I think this theory can become much more strengthened. The idea, as I said, is that the D means a smile. Now then, why would this happen? Why would the D be that? A smile. There are several arguments to think this, and one of them is the strange relationship between the D and smiles. And it's that when we've seen some D characters die, they've had a smile. And we've seen, for example, Luffy, when he was about to die in Loguetown, he smiled and the lightning struck and saved him. Then we have Ace, who smiled before he died as well. Even Roger, too, the last thing he did was smile. And as I say, this strange relationship might suggest that the D could mean a smile. Besides this, there are many things. Obviously, a very important factor is that the final island is called Laughtale, which is Tale of Laughs. So obviously, this idea implies that maybe this D means smile because it is completely related to Laughtale, with laughter. And another argument to consider is that in One Piece there are very distinctive laughs, and it is one of the most important and distinctive elements of all of One Piece. We start watching the series, and surely if we think a bit, 3 or 4 very distinctive laughs come to mind, which are very strange and given a lot of detail. It's true that not all the people who have these distinctive laughs are D, but it is also true that this idea that laughs are important has been emphasized a lot. So of course, beyond the D meaning smile, it could come from it being a reminder that laughter is important for something, or at least it was for the ancient kingdom, and this might have importance in the future. But as I say, those are variations of the same branch of the theory, which is that it comes from the D, which would be the smile. Something else important that we can highlight, and that can be added as a very interesting argument, is that in the Wano arc, right at the end, when Luffy awakens his devil fruit, we see that he transforms into Gear 5, and we see something very important, which is that Luffy starts to laugh a lot more. And it seems, as I said, that the sun god Nika was also known as the god of liberation and many other nicknames, but among them, it seems he always brings laughter, always brings happiness. In fact, Luffy's personality changes a lot when he is in Gear 5 compared to his normal state. There is a big difference. Even we have seen that characters from the Elba arc mentioned by Kuma himself have said that this, well, brought happiness. That the sun god Nika brought laughter and happiness wherever he went. Then, once again, we see the importance of laughter, and of course knowing how he is writing things, knowing how this gentleman likes to have everything calculated, we have seen that definitely, based on all the things I have mentioned in this video, and many other details that can be gleaned, because if we start looking, we can find things everywhere. Is that precisely laughter is important, the smile is very important. And what better way to hide it in plain sight? The fact of, as I say, including all these references would be nothing more than for when we reach the final arc and things about the Void Century are explained to us, it can be revealed that laughs are important. And this would also be justified by saying that those of the DClan would have the D in their name because it would be a smile. Being this, as I say, well, it depends on the variation, like a reminder that the smile is important to activate something, like a reminder that laughter is important for the Void Century, like perhaps laughter is important because they were the ones in charge of bringing laughter to the world seen in another way. So, there are many variations, but the same thing always happens, and this would make a bit of sense. Because if we start thinking about why all the D we have seen have a D, and there is no one with a full name, I mean, maybe the Monkey D family has the D because they don't know what it means, because it has been lost over the years. even in the Gold D family, or even in the Jaguar D family. But really, in all the D we've seen, no one has their full last name, and they all have a D. Perhaps that D we think is a word is nothing more than that, a smile, a symbol that means a smile. I think this makes a lot of sense because, as I said, these are families spread across the world, even belonging to different races, because we have seen that, for example, Saul is a giant and has nothing to do with Luffy in terms of race, and we have seen that they indeed share the same D and everything remains the same. So, these are quite curious things, and perhaps we are thinking week after week, trying to analyze everything, searching for hundreds of meanings and all, and then in the end, it turns out that it is simply a smile. It's something that personally seems very typical of Eiichiro Oda, something that wouldn't surprise me at all if Oda ends up doing this, and I have to say that I can even see it being somewhat feasible. In fact, something very important that is mentioned, that seems to be very important and is said to have been completely intentional and nothing more than symbolism by Oda, let's say, in some way to do a bit of foreshadowing of what will happen with the D and the smile symbol, it's precisely the smile fruits. And it's because the smile fruits we have seen doom those who consume them to laugh forever. That is to say, they cannot express any emotion other than laughter, not only emphasizing laughter again, but it would be a kind of macabre parody of the true power of the D or Nika, which would be to make people laugh with joy. And this would be a bit different, since we would see that people smile with the Ds, people are happy, and the D symbolizes the smile, and those fruits that remain somewhat defective and are closely linked to the bad side of the world, with what could be the world government, since the person who trafficked them was Doflamingo, who is the closest representation to Emu that we have seen in the One Piece manga. Is the person who was controlling them, which would be nothing more than a kind of parody, showing us that it would be like a fake laugh. That is to say, the D would bring you true happiness and joy, would make you laugh, while the smile would make you laugh, but would not truly make you happy. In other words, it would simply be an aesthetic thing that you would see from the outside, like everyone appearing very happy, but inside they would be shattered. Being, as I say, a kind of parody on the part of Eiichiro Oda, making it very macabre. So, as I say, this theory is one of the oldest in the One Piece community. It is one of the first meanings given to the D in One Piece, and it seems that arc after arc, at least, the smiles and laughter are gaining strength. Now I ask you, do you think this theory could possibly be real? Personally, I see a bit of a problem. It is true that I can see a lot of symbolism, but it is also true that there are other theories that convince me quite a bit, and I quite like the idea that the D could mean a smile. I would have to see how Oda can do it, and I think that if it's really incorporated into the work, it could be quite interesting, but it's one thing for me to like how it could be embedded in the work, another thing is for me to like the result, and another is to really see the possibility of it happening, which obviously lowers the likelihood significantly. So I want you to leave in the comments right now what you think about this third theory, whether you agree or not, and if you even have any additional arguments to add, then leave them in the comments. And now, let's move on to the fourth theory. As for the fourth theory, we are going to something relatively similar to what we just discussed in the third. Regarding the third theory, beyond having mentioned that the D could mean a smile, the most important, the most notable in comparison to most theories is that, as I have mentioned to you, it does not mean a word. It does not mean, for example, Tore, which we mentioned earlier. It does not mean Diluvian, which we mentioned earlier, but it would mean that, a symbol. And one argument I have given you, which I believe makes a lot of sense, is the fact that no family of the D-Clan has its full name, given that, as I say I repeat, each one is separated by parts of the world, many don't even know each other and even belong to different races, which, well, wouldn't make much sense for them to have that D, but they would have to have at least one with the full last name, especially because, as I say, they come from family branches from way back. So, what if this really is what I'm saying? Because it's not a word, it's a symbol. Now, what about this? Okay, it's a symbol. What happens? It's not a smile like the third theory, so what does it mean? Well, the idea would be that it doesn't mean anything specific, and this can be a double-edged sword. What I'm getting at is that the theory is literally like this. The theory says that indeed the D doesn't mean anything, but it is very important that it's simply a symbol. The most widespread idea, the most comprehensive idea, is to say that the D is nothing more than an important symbol for either the ancient kingdom or a group of people very affiliated with Joy Boy, or it could even be that it was affiliated with Joy Boy. Within this idea that it does not mean a word, but rather a symbol, I have found some interesting ideas. I have found the idea that the D is nothing more than a representation of what could be seen in the sky as a crescent moon. And in fact, if we look at the text of Elbaf, we see that a crescent moon is also mentioned there. This, as I say, I add myself, since the crescent moon is earlier, but as we see, there is again a representation, so this becomes important again. Another thing that I have thought this D crescent could mean. Another thing I thought this letter D could mean, if it were a symbol instead of a letter, it could mean, if we go completely crazy, the top of the straw hat, which obviously again is a letter D. I know it's crazy and doesn't make any sense. I'm trying to argue the theory itself, which, as I said, has several branches, and another idea which has convinced me more and seems to have quite some logic, especially because I think Oda put this in many chapters ago and maybe didn't do it for no reason, and now it seems that he might be incorporating it again, and it's that the D would be a symbol of Joy Boy's Nakama. This might not be clear why I'm going this direction and why they would use a D. Well, I'll explain it very simply. We have to go back to the Alabasta arc, and if we recall, during this arc we have a problem, which is that Bon Clay touched all the Straw Hats, making them have his faces, and this way, the Straw Hats were afraid to go to Alabasta, meet someone from their crew, and not know if it was that person, or Bon Clay. So what did they decide to do? They put a mark on their arm to differentiate themselves from one another. And this might happen just like that, but when they are saying goodbye to Arabasta, when they are leaving the island, and when the arc is ending, to say goodbye to Vivi, since they cannot say goodbye and look at each other, because obviously Vivi would have problems. They raise their arm with their back turned, showing that X marked on the arm, and in this way they show Vivi that they are Nakamas, and it is a symbol of camaraderie, which Vivi also replicates by raising her arm along with Garu, and in this way she shows the X and becomes that X into a symbol of their camaraderie. And this, which might seem silly and was mostly forgotten, we've seen that Oda has brought it back. At the beginning of the Elbaf arc, we see that they are reading a newspaper featuring Luffy, and we see that he has an X on his arm. Many people didn't understand this very well, because many thought that this X appeared on Luffy's arm because it was something that showed up in 5th gear, and that it was something not shown to us until now, but in that particular photo it was visible, and this obviously could be interesting. But the thing is, it is not like that. Let's remember that Vivi is currently with Morgans, who is the person to publish the newspaper with all the photos. So, Vivi, to discreetly let the Straw Hats know she was with Morgans and that she was okay, and they could even go to rescue her, decided to subtly draw that X on her arm as a sort of message to the Straw Hats. What happened? The Straw Hats looking at this newspaper at that moment were not the ones who had been in Alabasta, as the rest had been taken to Elbaf. So Oda has left this a bit on hold for now, but this obviously has to progress later on. And what this theory points out is that Oda has brought this back and is going to give it importance, not just because of Vivi, not just because of all this, but because Oda has always had in mind that what happened to the Straw Hats with Vivi also happened to Joy Boy with the rest of his crew, and perhaps, well, another person, maybe Nefertari Lily, I'm not sure, but instead of putting an X on their arm, they put a letter D. Why? Well, Oda can justify this in 1,000 ways, but the important thing wouldn't be the why, the important thing would be the symbol. And that D would be a way to remember all the people who were involved with Joy Boy in the past, a way to remember all that, a way to show that they were crewmates of Joy Boy without saying it publicly, which is exactly the same thing that happens with the Straw Hats when they are leaving Alabasta, where they couldn't say they were crewmates of Vivi, but look at how they did it to let her see that they were crewmates and left that X on their arm, making it a bit symbolic. So, since Joy Boy was surely the most dangerous person in the world for the world government in the past and caused many problems, many people could not publicly say they were Nakamas of Joy Boy, but in a subtly way they hid it in their name by adding a D. In this way, they would recognize each other through the ages, know everything perfectly. It would be a way to honor Joy Boy, who I suppose at that moment might have died or been captured or something, and this would make the world government later find out and understand. what the D meant, that it was not anything concrete, but a symbol that those people, many years ago, those families had help Joy Boy, which I personally like. I find it quite entertaining, quite interesting, and I'm completely on board with it. So personally, I love the idea that the D could mean something that is a symbol. Obviously, if we start to go crazy and begin to put anything into this symbol, we could imagine anything and think it could literally be anything. So surely now that you've heard this theory, that it might mean something specific, a specific symbol, something you'd say, hey, for me, it means this. Now that you've mentioned it, it came to mind, and I think it could be an interesting symbol. Leave it for me in the comments, because you know I love reading them. In fact, you can even debate a little among yourselves in the comments. And I have to say that I like this idea that the D means nothing and is just a symbol. It's very Oda, it's very One Piece, and I think it would be a way to make us ponder a bit, since all the words with D have been related to the D at some point, even by adding or removing arguments. So personally, I quite like it. But now, let's move on to the fifth theory of the D. And now let's move on to the fifth theory, which comes from, as I said, quite a while ago. It's one of the first theories made about the D, one of the most general and one of the most well-known, but perhaps in the latest chapters of the manga, it has gained quite a lot of strength, and the theory is simply that the letter D could mean the word demon. From right now, I know there will be two types of people. Those who might think this theory makes a lot of sense because of, as I said, the recent manga chapters, and those who might think the exact opposite for the same reason, as we have seen that Imu has taken control of certain giants from Elba and has shown to be a demon or has a demon fruit or whatever, but that the world government and Imu have a direct relationship with demons. Obviously, it makes sense that there are people who think one way and people who think another way. Why? Well, basically because with demons existing in a confirmed way in One Piece, it makes sense that the D could be demon, because it opens up the possibility that it exists, which is not a possibility you just made up or something like that. But then we have the negative side, which is that it is precisely the world government that is acting as the demon, meaning the enemies of the D. So this wouldn't make much sense, but let's closely examine why the D could mean demon. The first thing is that despite us having seen Imu being a demon as such, they have been called gods throughout the entire work, and we have seen that indeed the D were the natural enemies of the gods. And throughout all history, the enemies of the gods are the demons. So this theory suggests that it makes a lot of sense for the D to mean demons, as it is a very simple way to say they are demons and that they have enmity with the gods, who would at that moment be the world government. And of course, after the recent chapters, a bit of doubt arises. Are they really gods? Do they call themselves gods? Or are they going to play this card of wanting to make it seem like they're gods and that the others are actually the demons? Or perhaps this makes sense and they were considered demons in the past, and that's why they were given the D when the real demon was someone else. I don't know, but since we have seen demons in this work, this theory gains strength. Then, another strong argument is a very characteristic thing of One Piece. And as I said, there are several anime with their characteristic things, and One Piece has something very specific: devil fruits. Indeed, devil. So, since it is often related that the devil fruits might come from the ancient kingdom, and that the D might also come from there, they were the creators of the devil fruits, or at least their families a long time ago. That is why they were classified as demons, and those fruits as devil fruits, so that everything makes sense, which would be something more representative, and that would make sense within the world of One Piece. Because, as I say, Oda has already used the word, so seeing that and seeing the last chapters, we already have a couple of references to the word demons that we have to keep in mind, because Oda doesn't do it just because, and on top of that, he hasn't included it in characters who are somewhat important. We're talking about how he has included it in the most important power system in One Piece, which are the devil fruits, even above Haki, and he has also included it in the most important character related to the Ds, which is Imu. That is to say, there is a key importance. Then, something important mentioned by the theory is that it is said in the One Piece manga that the D will be the ones to cause another storm. The D are the ones who will bring the storm, and in literature in general, storms often herald the arrival of demonic or cataclysmic beings who are, well, sent by the demons themselves. So storms and demons often have a certain relation, and as I said, the manga specifies that it's the D, therefore, well, the demons would bring the storm. And then, as a final argument, it is mentioned that this D could be a kind of psychological bias to manipulate people. It is said that they were given the name of demons in this way to scare people. That is, in the past, these people were labeled as demons to the enemies of the world government so that people would be afraid of them. If already when we have seen any user of a devil fruit, or when mentioned, it has not pleased them and they have been scared and above all have had certain fear in the majority of the population in the world of One Piece, as can be the East Blue, the North Blue, the South Blue, and the West, it would make sense that if these people are nicknamed demons, as could happen with Nico Robin, who was called the Demon Child, then it would make sense that over time these families have been called demons and that the people would have been quite afraid of them. Even they had to shorten the word to the letter D so that no one would recognize it, but among themselves, they knew that D stood for demon. This way, people wouldn't get scared, and they would keep the D in their name to remember what happened, to remember that they were labeled as demons by the world government. And that in the future, they could seek revenge, which I must say makes quite a lot of sense. And these would primarily be the arguments to think that the letter D can mean demon, demonio, or however you want to see it. As I say, it seems quite well supported, just like the other theories, so I think it deserves a positive point. But the most curious thing about this is that despite having seen 5 very interesting theories about the D, and that many of them are even very popular, it's also true that there are at least 30, 40, or 50 more that also have many arguments to be real, which makes me think many times. If Oda already has a predetermined meaning for this letter, or if he really has, let's say, a range of possibilities, and will choose the one that seems most interesting to him at that moment and also the least discussed, since when we start relating these letters with One Piece, they all end up making more or less sense. As I said, it makes me wonder if these clues are inserted casually, or if Oda is really playing many sides to surprise us no matter what happens. After all, out of these 50 theories that will exist, only one will actually be true. And who knows, it might even be a possibility we haven't considered. Talk about his mysterious third devil fruit. Yes, that extra fruit that we all suspect he is going to eat if he hasn't already eaten it secretly off camera and we haven't seen it. And it's that Blackbeard is not just any pirate, he is the pirate, full of mysteries, tricks, and has been keeping us puzzled for many years. But this character has something very curious. 3 skulls on his flag, 3 pistols on his belt, 3 braids in his beard. This man has a fetish with the number 3 bigger than Zoro's with Sake, or mine with Nami. And when I see a pattern repeating in One Piece, like this 3, I already smell that there's a clear foreshadowing. So the million-dollar question is, what would be Blackbeard's third devil fruit? To this day, we know that Teach ate the Yami Yami no Mi, which is the Darkness Logia, a very broken fruit that nullifies powers, turns you into a human black hole, and he has also consumed the Gura Gura no Mi, which is the Paramecia of earthquakes, stolen from Edward Newgate at Marineford. No small feat, and we see that he has absolute darkness in one hand and total destruction in the other. So what is missing for the trio? Well, a Zoan, obviously, since it would be the Logia plus the Paramecia, and the Zoan would be missing a complete combo. And knowing Oda, it surely won't be just any Zoan, it won't be a Zoan of a cat probably, but rather a mythical Zoan, a legendary Zoan, one of those Zoans that when we see it, we'll get up from our chairs and applaud. Many theories have been floating around, like the 3-headed Cerberus, or a hippopotamus, or that he was going to take Kaido's, Marco's, or even Moria's. Although Moria's is not a Zoan, it was also part of the theory. Let's say a whole zoo applied to Teach. Some made a lot of sense at the time, others were stranger than a Denden Mushi with Wi-Fi, but since we entered the final saga of the manga, today chapter 1155, Oda has given us one of those brutal hints that makes one of those theories stand out much more than the others as the most epic and logical candidate. And this would be the mythical Zone model Kraken, inspired by the legendary figure of Davy Jones. Yes, you heard right, Blackbeard turning into a mythological Kraken, the tentacled sea monster of pirate legends. And this does sound very crazy, very exaggerated, and it's perfect. As I said, I published this theory several years ago and gave you several arguments, but many of these no longer apply, many have changed, and there is a lot of new information we need to add. And I believe that with the latest chapters of the manga, this has gained a lot of strength, and now you will understand why. I know that maybe there are many people who are not convinced yet. Well, don't worry, hold on, because I'm going to break down all the old and new arguments that point to this theory. And along the way, we'll have some laughs watching some things, as we'll see what past elements fit like a glove with the Kraken theme, what old ideas needed correcting with what we knew up to chapter 1155, and how recent revelations in the manga, including the bombshell that Rock's deed Zebeck is Teach's father, and the appearance of the mythical Davy Jones in the conversation, make this theory go from possible to entirely very possible. So let's go and dive into the ultimate theory of Blackbeard's third fruit. But before we plunge into the world of octopuses, krakens, and all that, let's put into context the theories that the community had been handling until relatively recently about Teach's third fruit. Because believe me, there's been everything and for all tastes, a buffet of mythological animals. The first one we are going to discuss is the Cerberus, which is the three-headed dog. This was one of the first theories that became very popular. Why? Well, because of the darn number 3. 3 skulls on Blackbeard's flag. Cerberus was the guardian of the underworld, and Blackbeard is practically the darkest and most demonic lord in One Piece right now, with the permission of Emu, whom we haven't seen, and it fit well with the symbolism. Teach with a mythical Zoan model, Cerberus could explain his 3 personalities, or the possibility of having 3 fruits. Some even thought he already had it before, and that thanks to it he could withstand eating the other 2 fruits without exploding. The idea is quite interesting on paper. Imagine Blackbeard transforming into a giant 3-headed dog and spewing darkness, earthquakes. It would be a very diabolical image, but honestly, over time, doubts began to arise. Would Oda really give Teach the Cerberus fruit just for the joke about the 3 heads? Many, including myself, thought that perhaps it was too simple or too strange, and that the 3 heads on the flag might refer to something else. 3 hearts, maybe? Well, now we will go with that. But in addition, there is a very important thing to discard this theory, and it is that we have seen that the character Shamrock had a sword that had also consumed the Cerberus fruit, and as we know, there is only 1 fruit of each type in One Piece. That is to say, there will not be another Cerberus fruit, which is why this theory is obviously discarded, because I don't see Blackbeard trying to end the life of a sword to get that fruit. The second theory we are going to discuss is the hippopotamus theory, and this theory mainly arose because of Eiichiro Oda himself and his quirks. For those who don't know, Oda usually assigns representative animals to the characters. In the Straw Hat Crew, for example, Luffy is a monkey. Well, can you guess what animal Oda said Blackbeard would be? Bingo, a hippopotamus. Just like that, and in some illustrations and covers, in fact, he has drawn him with hippos just because. At first we were all like, what do you mean a hippo? But then you stop to think and you have that. Hippos, although they seem very gentle animals, are among the most dangerous and lethal animals in Africa. They kill more people per year than many known predators. In fact, it is the animal that kills the most per year, except for mosquitoes, which are insects. And in that, it resembles Teach, who is lethal and very violent. And wait, there's more. It turns out that hippos have 3 stomachs or 3 stomach chambers, which at the time set off alarms about the number 3 again. There were already people pulling out the theory calculator saying Teach equals hippo equals can eat 3 fruits without dying because they digest them separately. Well, they were certainly creative. The hippopotamus theory sounded so far-fetched that you didn't know whether to laugh or take it seriously. Because on one hand, it's true that Oda could have been hinting at the hippopotamus, drawing it with Blackbeard. The connection of 3 is there too, with the theme of the 3 stomachs. But let's be realistic, a hippopotamus, no matter how violent it is, doesn't have the epic level 1 expects from the final villain or their secret weapon. Let's compare the image of Luffy fighting a hippopotamus Blackbeard with, I don't know, Luffy against a dragon like Kaido, Luffy fighting a phoenix with the theory that he would steal Marco's fruit, or even with a Kraken. Well, obviously it doesn't quite fit. Moreover, the powers of the hippopotamus fruit would be brute strength, powerful jaws, and not much else. Oda didn't hype us for so many years with the mystery of Teach for the revelation to be. Oh look, he transforms into Moto Moto from Madagascar, so although it has its basis in some curious hints, I would rule out the hippopotamus as the 3rd fruit. Thank you for participating, hippopotamus. Go back to the river. Then there was another theory that he would steal Kaido's fruit, the dragon fruit. And during the Wano arc, there were those who bet that Teach would appear at the end, like the ultimate opportunist, as always, and take the Wo no Mi dragon model from Kaido after his defeat. After all, Blackbeard is a scavenger pirate who takes advantage of situations. He already did it in Marineford by stealing the Gora Gora. Why not in Wano with Kaido's? And a dragon would fit as a super powerful mythological zone, giving Teach the trifecta, darkness, earthquakes, and dragonfire. Almost invincible. Sounds like a final boss in an RPG. A dragon that generates earthquakes, black holes. Basically, it seems like a boss straight out of the Navy's worst nightmare. Now then, this theory cooled off very quickly, and Oda dismissed it with facts. First, because, spoiler, Teach did not appear in the Wano arc, nor was he needed, as he was busy with his own matters. Second, because if he had done it, he probably would have gone for more strategic things like the poneglyphs or some bigger plan before going to fight for Kaido's fruit. And third, and most importantly, Luffy already fought against Kaido and his dragon fruit throughout Wano. It would be anticlimactic and repetitive for the final enemy, who would be Teach, to have the same fruit, especially one as significant as Kaido's. Oda usually doesn't repeat those identical battles. We need novelty in the final confrontation. Not Luffy versus a Dragon 2 now with Blackbeard. So as epic as a Dragon Teach sounds, it's practically impossible for it to happen. Wano ended, Kaido sank into the magma with his fruit, and Blackbeard didn't show up there. So we dismissed the dragon theory with a 0% probability. Another interesting theory was that he would steal Marco's fruit, the Phoenix. This theory emerged post-Wano, when Marco was alive and kicking, but a bit directionless. And it was said, what if Teach, to complete his set, hunts Marco and takes the Tori Tori no Mi Phoenix model from him, a black Phoenix, because it would be with Teach's darkness, surely turning the yellow flames to a black color. It would be a spectacle, and the Phoenix fruit also provides immense regeneration and resistance. Exactly Teach's weak point, as he constantly complains about pain. Having crazy regeneration would compensate for the disadvantage of the Yami Yami, which makes him suffer double damage. Hey, it would be great for Teach, because being able to fly like a phoenix to escape or attack from the sky would be incredible. The Phoenix theory had its charm. It would be a top mythological area, well known but not overexposed, since we saw Marco fight several times, but we don't know every technique in detail. Drawbacks? Mainly that it implied killing Marco, a beloved character, and there was no clear sign that Teach was after him. In fact, Teach already had his revenge with the remnants of the Whitebeard pirates in the Payback War, where he defeated Marco, but he didn't kill him then. After that, Teach seemed more interested in other targets, Amazon Lily, the Road Poneglyphs, and indeed, up to chapter 95, there is no sign that Teach cares about Marco at this point. Marco is still alive and free, so even though I like the idea of a Black Phoenix in theory, nothing has materialized to support it, added to the fact that Oda prefers to surprise with new fruits in the major villains. We've already seen quite a bit of the Phoenix one, and I don't give it much chance either. Another interesting idea was to steal Moria's fruit, and this is interesting because of the recent story. We know that Teach received Gecko Moria in Hachinosu, his pirate island. After the reverie, Moria appeared to take revenge for Absalom, and basically Teach told him, "Join me or die." Since then, Moria has been missing in action. Many speculated that Teach might have killed Moria and taken his shadow fruit. Advantages? Well, the Kage Kage could combine in very shady ways with the Yami Yami. Imagine Teach creating total darkness, without light, and using the shadows of his enemies in that gloom, easily stealing them and manipulating them at will. It would enhance the Kage Kage to the maximum, because darkness creates the best shadows. It sounds terrifying. Moreover, stealing powerful fruits is precisely the criminal option of Teach's crew. They already said it in the manga, they are hunting users to take their devil fruits. But here's a cold bucket of water. If Teach is gonna have a third fruit, it makes sense for it to be a Zoan, not another Paramecia. He already has a Paramecia, the Gura Gura, and he already broke the rule of only one power with two different fruits. Giving him a second Paramecia instead of a Zoan would leave us lacking in the famous trio. And Oda is a fan of balanced trios. On the other hand, Moria is still alive, and if Teach didn't kill him on the spot, it's because he either wants him for something, information, a temporary alliance, or who knows, or simply Oda has plans to include Moria in some future plot, perhaps taking revenge on Teach. How ironic that would be. In the end, we don't see Teach showing off the Ichibukai zombie abilities around. Moreover, a Paramecia like that, although it would be useful, does not have that legendary aura we would want for Teach's last fruit. We also discard it. Another very interesting one was the heavy no Mi model Yamata no Orochi. Orochi's from Wano. This was much more niche, but someone mentioned it, and after all, it is a mythological Zoan with a lot of regeneration. You had to cut off 8 heads of Orochi for him to really kick the bucket. Now imagine Blackbeard with 8 snake heads, plus his own head, making 9 in total, and being a bearded Hydra attacking Luffy. Can you imagine? I mean, visually it's brutal and would give him incredible endurance. You'd have to kill him 9 times, almost like the typical video game where you defeat the final boss and he appears in a new form. And since Orochi was useless and his fruit was quite underutilized, he only used it to scream and little else. Many fans thought that Oda could recycle that fruit, giving it to someone truly powerful. What is the problem? Well, similar to the case of Kaido, Wano ended, Orochi died, burned, and his Akuma no Mi would have been reborn somewhere. Where? No idea, but after Wano, it was not mentioned again. It could be around somewhere, yes, but it would be a stretch for Teach to obtain it and have it off screen, bringing him or his subordinates back to Wano just to look for that fruit. It would be a bit anticlimactic. And besides, narratively, what connects Teach with Orochi or with that fruit? Well, nothing really. It was just the idea of a zone completely underutilized. Personally, I would have liked to see more of Teach with that fruit than with the previous ones, because at least it's mythological and would add some intrigue. But there are no clear indications, neither before nor after the Wano arc, that point to that. So interesting, but unlikely. And okay, with this we have the review done. As you can see at this point, many of these theories have lost strength or have been indirectly dismissed by the story. Cerberus was left without new support, and with the revelation that the fruit is already with the sword, well, complicated. The hippopotamus Zoan was a curious nod, but not very spectacular for the climax of One Piece. Kaido's dragon was already faced, Marco's phoenix didn't happen, and Marco is still alive. The shadows of Moria don't fit because it's Paramecia, and Moria is still alive. The snake of Orochi got a bit lost in the post-Wano limbo. So what then? We arrive at the octopus/Kraken theory, which was there, somewhat hidden among many others, and suddenly has gained a lot of traction to be the correct one thanks to new clues. As I said before, this theory has existed for quite some time, as I published it about 3 or 4 years ago. But oh my, now everything fits together like a well-made 1,000-piece puzzle, and I'm gonna tell you why the Kraken is the perfect candidate for Blackbeard's third fruit and how Oda has been dropping hints about this from the beginning, only to hit us with the confirmation in the final saga. Pay attention, here comes the juicy part, the clue of the number 3 and Teach's strange body. Blackbeard with tentacles. Let's start with the basic and obvious, the number 3 following Blackbeard everywhere. I've mentioned it before, but let's delve a little deeper. Teach has 3 skulls on his pirate flag, which is very unusual. Normally it's 1 skull, but 3 complete skulls. Only he has that. After the time skip, Oda decided to draw him with 3 braids hanging from his beard. An aesthetic detail, yes, but by now we know that in One Piece, few things are innocent coincidences. And to top it off, Teach is always armed with 3 pistols. Are you gonna tell me that all this is not on purpose? Blackbeard is the walking number 3. For a long time, fans have interpreted this as he will have 3 powers, 3 personalities, or souls, or something like that. Well, what creature in nature also has the number 3 prominently in its organism? The octopus. Yes, a common octopus. That mollusk with tentacles that we see in takoyaki salad has 3 hearts beating inside it, not 1 or 2. 3 real hearts. A main heart that pumps the blood, blue by the way, octopus blood is blue, and 2 auxiliary hearts dedicated to pumping blood to the gills. 3 engines within the same body. Tell me if the biology of this creature isn't amazing. Now, tell me if it doesn't remind you a bit of the crazy idea of a body with 3 souls, or 3 energies, or 3 devil fruits coexisting. Could it be that Teach literally has, thanks to the Zoan, 3 hearts, 1 for each devil fruit he possesses? It sounds like something out of a conspiracy theory, but biologically an octopus has them. 1 heart for each gill, plus the central one, so Teach's connection with the number 3 might not come from a hellhound or a gluttonous hippopotamus, but from an octopus with its triple heart. But wait, it doesn't end there. Octopuses have more characteristics that are very curious. Did you know that octopuses are among the strangest animals in the world? Seriously, their physiology is out of this world. They have, for example, a super developed but distributed nervous system, as 2/3 of their neurons are in their tentacles, not in the head, and that means an octopus's tentacles have a mind of their own in a way. They can make movements and even basic decisions without the central brain completely controlling them. In fact, if you cut off an octopus's tentacle, the tentacle can continue moving for a while, reacting to stimuli or even trying to grab food and bring it to where the octopus's mouth would be. In other words, a separated part of the body acts almost like an independent organism for a time. A strange body, literally, and any One Piece fan right now will be thinking of that famous phrase from Marco during the Marineford War. That guy Teach has always had a strange body. When Marco shouted to be careful because Blackbeard didn't have a normal body, that he was different. That phrase has tortured our minds since then. What on earth does Teach have in his body to be different? Some said, well, he has his Siamese brothers inside. Another, that he has multiple personalities. Another, that he ate a mythical fruit before. What if the answer is precisely that Teach had already become a humanoid octopus thanks to a Zoan, and that's why his internal physiology is different, allowing him to do things impossible for others? Marco, as a doctor and as an old crew member of the same ship, perhaps noticed with his instincts that Teach's issue was not just gluttony, but that there was something anatomically anomalous, a strange body, just like an octopus tentacle that keeps moving on its own, something strange, foreign to the accumulation. It's just that we know Teach never sleeps, since Baggy mentioned in that flashback in chapter 90 something like, "Hey, did you know that Teach has never slept once in his life?" He's a monster, and who doesn't sleep or sleeps very little? Again, our friends the octopuses. Scientific studies show that octopuses sleep very little in short naps, and in very safe environments, and they do it almost with one eye open, so to speak. An average octopus can sleep only a couple of hours in total per day, and in an intermittent way. Basically, they have insomnia. And Teach? Well, the same. Coincidence? Another one. One would think that so many coincidences with an octopus are just too much. Also, let's consider Teach's main weakness. The guy takes hits like nobody's business. Unlike many Logia who avoid damage by turning into their element, Teach cannot become intangible with the Yami Yami. On the contrary, his fruit absorbs the attacks. He feels them all multiplied. Every time he gets hit, he screams in pain a lot. Let's remember when Luffy in Impelled Down punched him in anger over Ace. Teach rolled on the ground in exaggerated pain. Or when Magellan poisoned him and he almost kicked the bucket. Teach himself admits that the pain feels twice as much with his power. And what is the body of an octopus like? Soft, vulnerable, and boneless. An octopus has no shell or skeleton. It's practically all muscle and soft skin. They can easily suffer cuts or damage. They are not animals made to take hits, but to avoid them. They flee, camouflage, spit ink, and leave. An octopus on land would be clumsy and slow. Sound familiar? Teach is a bit slow and clumsy, and in his hand-to-hand fights, he doesn't dodge at all. He takes attacks head-on, and certainly, Teach behaves like an octopus out of water. Teach gets tired quickly. He has been seen panting after certain efforts. And let's remember that despite being relatively young, since he is 40 years old, he is 1 year younger than Shanks and younger than Doflamingo, others of his generation. This would fit with the biological note that the central heart of the octopus stops when it swims. Octopuses get tired quickly if they are in constant motion. That's why they usually crawl or stay still. Teach isn't exactly the most athletic, is he? He prefers to plan, ambush, and use his powers from a distance to avoid long hand-to-hand fights where he gets exhausted. All these physical disadvantages of Teach, the intense pain, low speed, questionable endurance, could be attributed to his body having octopus-like qualities. In other words, his hypothetical Kraken fruit would have given him tremendous powers at the cost of a more fragile body. It would be a nice balance to be able to use 3 fruits. His octopus body would penalize him in durability, a disadvantage we have already seen. And something very curious about octopuses is that they are animals with a quite surprising regenerative capacity. In nature, an octopus can lose a tentacle due to a predator attack or even self-amputate it to escape, similar to what lizards do with their tails. But the impressive thing is that they can completely regenerate a lost arm in a matter of weeks or months, and they not only regenerate the flesh and skin, but they also regenerate nerves, suckers, blood vessels, and even the nerve ganglia inside the arm. The new arm is completely functional, as if nothing had happened. How do they do it? Well, they have stem cells and biological processes that reactivate tissue formation. In fact, there are scientific studies where it is observed that the new arm starts as a small bud and gradually takes the complete shape of the original tentacle. It's just that when we see this and add that Teach has a problem, suffering twice the pain due to his Yami Yami, it makes it so that despite feeling pain, the damage is not as evident since he is able to regenerate very quickly. Something that would have an absolutely brutal power, having incredible regeneration, having the Yami Yami to nullify any fruit and do many things with the black holes, and have all the total power with the fruit capable of destroying the world, the amnesia of the earthquakes. And if you think Oda hasn't left visual clues of octopuses around Teach, I'll tell you that there are fans with a keen eye who point out curious details. Where Marco mentions something about a strange body, a subordinate appears with an octopus on his head, an intentional nod, or am I maybe getting paranoid? Maybe Oda drew that octopus to laugh in our faces, but we will never know until the story ends. What is undeniable is that Oda loves octopuses, and when the Straw Hats fall as spies, we see them fall on an octopus that acts as balloons. Or even Fishman Island, where we have a friendly Kraken named Tsurume, which Luffy tames. Oda always has octopuses appearing in his work. Sometimes for funny things, sometimes for crucial things. Is it a coincidence that precisely the final saga brings us these references to Davy Jones, which we will talk about now, and that the most solid theory points to it being the fruit of a Kraken octopus for Teach? I would say that Oda has been playing tricks, but leaving breadcrumbs all the time. Let's quickly recap this section because it is very important. Teach and octopuses share a lot of peculiarities. The number 3, which is everywhere, and the octopus has 3 hearts. Teach has a strange body, and octopuses have tentacles with their own movement. Teach does not sleep, and octopuses sleep very little, or almost not at all. Teach feels a lot of pain, and octopuses have a very soft body without any kind of shell, and if it turns out that Blackbeard has been half octopus for years, and we didn't know it, many theorize that Teach could have already consumed the octopus Zoan before joining the Whitebeard pirates. Could a young Teach have found the Kraken fruit and kept its power a secret for decades? It's difficult, but not impossible. Teach played the role of weak and harmless to Whitebeard's crew for 20 years, waiting for the opportunity to steal the Yammy Yammy. No one suspected him, and if he took advantage of that low profile to never reveal his Zoan transformation, maybe he never needed to transform or did it secretly somewhere. The other option is that he doesn't have it yet, but is actively searching for it to complete the set. We know that his crew is hunting for powerful fruits. He risked it at Amazon Lily for Boa Hancock's Mero Mero, for example. He sent his Nakamas to steal Absalom's Suke Suke, and if on his personal agenda is to capture the current possessor of the Kraken fruit, or find it if it is hidden in some mythical place. After all, mythical Zoan fruits of legendary animals are not easy to obtain. They are often tied to very big stories. An example would be the Nika fruit with Luffy. For now, no one known has revealed the story, which is great because it leaves the door open for Teach to surprise us in the great final battle, showing a monstrous transformation never seen before. Imagine the situation, Luffy and Teach in their decisive confrontation, both already wounded and exhausted, Luffy perhaps in Gear 5 Nika unleashing all his power, and Teach says, "Did you think you had seen it all, Straw Hat?" And boom, he transforms into a gigantic Kraken, a black tentacled beast splattered with darkness. It would be cinematic, and now we come to the icing on the cake, the connection with Davy Jones. Because everything about the octopuses was very powerful, but what elevates it from a possible theory to an almost confirmed theory? Well, Oda has recently introduced Davy Jones into the plot, in fact in a very specific way, and we see that it points directly to Blackbeard, the legacy of Rox D, Zebeck and Davy Jones, direct foreshadowing to the Kraken. If you're up to date with the manga until chapter 1000, you'll know that Oda dropped a historical bomb. Rox D. Zebeck, the legendary captain of the Rox Pirates, turned out to be the father of Marshal D. Teach. Although fans had suspected this for a while, because of the ship called Saber of Zebeck and other things we saw in the manga, seeing it confirmed left us all shocked. Blackbeard is the son of another infamous D, heir to the will of a man who wanted to be the king of the world. Blackbeard had on his ship the son of Gold D. Roger and the son of his rival, Rox D. Zebeck. What an irony of fate, and this adds another layer of depth to Teach. Not only is he evil due to personal ambition, but he carries the blood of Rox's legacy, the pirate who almost overthrew the world government in Gotham. And why does this matter for our Kraken theory? Well, because in chapter 1055, amid all the revelations of the flashback, we learned something very juicy. Rox D. Zebeck was a fan and admirer of Davy Jones. Yes, you read that right. In the flashback, Rox sneaks into Mary Jas right into Imusama's room and tells the world leader to their face that he was a fan of Davy Jones. Just like that, and the series had gone decades without explicitly mentioning Davy Jones, as he had only been mentioned a couple of times. And suddenly Zebeck, Teach's father, comes out saying he idolizes this guy. Coincidence? Is his foreshadowing as big as the elephant Zunesha? Oda never puts a legendary name in the mouth of a crucial character at this point without any reason. Why remind us of Davy Jones now? Well, let's unravel this. First, a bit of context about Davy Jones in One Piece. In our world, Davy Jones is sailor folklore. The demon of the sea, the master of Davy Jones's locker, which would be the seabed where the dead live. In One Piece, Oda also adapted that name for the Davy Back Fight, a legendary pirate game where crews wager members and flags. It is said in the manga that the game originated from a story where pirates made offerings to Davy Jones to recover their lost comrades. I mean, Davy Jones exists in the mythology of One Piece as a pirate or a legendary entity associated with the sea and gambling games between crews. His face or anything has never been shown, just the concept. Now, after this, it seems that Davy Jones was a real pirate from ancient history, maybe from centuries ago, who knows? He could even be from the Void Century or something like that. And we also know that Zebeck held him in high regard. We have Rox, who admired Davy Jones, and then we have Teach, who admires Rox enough to name his ship Saber of Zebeck and follow his will of chaos. Admiration is also inherited. I'm not saying that Teach worships Davy Jones on a personal altar, but it's very likely that he knows the stories of Davy Jones, either thanks to his father, or ancient documents, or simply the pirate culture passed down. Teach is quite a pirate history geek. Let's remember that he knew about the existence of the Yami Yami no Mi, and that he was searching for it for years, and that Eiichiro Oda himself said that if he had a profession in the real world, it would be archaeologist. If Oda links rocks with Davy Jones in this way, it's almost like he's shouting at us, pay attention, because the legend of Davy Jones is going to play a very important role in the final plot. And who better to embody this legend in the present era than Marshall D. Teach? Think about the parallels. Luffy embodies the will of Joy Boy Nika, which was that of the Dawn, the smiling liberator and all that, and Teach could embody that of Rocks, Davy Jones, the Dark Legend, the Cursed Conqueror. In fact, it would be something like the sun against the darkness, Free Surface against oppressive depths, Joy Boy against Davy Jones. It's almost poetic. Now, how does the Kraken fit into this? Well, because in popular imagery, Davy Jones is strongly associated with the Kraken. Look at the one from Pirates of the Caribbean, for instance. Davy Jones, with his tentacle beard and octopus face, controlled the Kraken and used it to sink ships. I'm not saying that Oda is going to copy that from Davy Jones, but it's quite a coincidence that the Kraken fruit theory fits with Teach, and suddenly Davy Jones becomes relevant to the story. It's as if Oda had thought, if I'm going to make Teach transform into the Kraken at the climax, I'd better start introducing the concept of Davy Jones so that fans can connect the dots and feel the classic pirate theme. Because let's remember Oda's words. One Piece, despite everything, is still a pirate story. And what is more classic pirate than the legend of Davy Jones, the Flying Dutchman, the Kraken that devours ships in the storm? Oda is going to give us mythological piracy straight to the vein for the end, I'm sure. With Rocks in the flashback, we learned that there were even real Davy backfights organized by him to recruit crew members. Rocks played Davy Jones's game to strengthen his crew. What a great detail, and this is something to think about. I wouldn't be surprised if Teach, as Zebeck's son, also uses a Davy backfive at some point in the current story for some twisted purpose. It would close the circle. Imagine if Teach challenges Luffy to a Davy backfive at some critical point, betting on something very big. Robin to read the poneglyphs, some road poneglyph, or the life of an ally. With Teach you never know. It would be a tremendous nod to the tradition of Davy Jones and his father Rocks. And if in the middle of this final game, Teach reveals his crane form, he would literally be honoring the legacy of Davy Jones in person. Returning to Davy Jones himself, we don't know if he will appear physically. A flashback of him? A ghost. A tale told by Brook? It would be fun. But the important thing is the influence of that figure on Teach. Davy Jones was greedy and cursed. And Blackbeard is greed personified. He wants the One Piece. He wants power. He wants to rule. And he wants all the strong fruits. He wants to be king of everything. Of the world. More greedy. Impossible. The curse could be his inability to sleep. I would bet on the impossibility of having a normal life due to the anomaly of his body. It could even foreshadow that Teach ends up with a tragic fate, sunk or destroyed by his own greed. Imagine that Luffy doesn't kill him, but after defeating him, Teach suffers some karmic punishment, being swallowed by the same darkness he controls, sent to the abyss, to his own Davy Jones's locker. Curious that Rocks disappeared, sunk on God Valley Island, right? Coincidence? I don't think so. Let's suppose that Blackbeard is the son of Rocks, inherited his will, Rock. Rocks admired Davy Jones, the pirate of the depths. Therefore, Teach is the living embodiment of that dark and legendary line of piracy, and here comes the final connection. The mythical Zoan of the Kraken would be the perfect element to materialize that connection in combat. With that fruit, Blackbeard literally becomes a legendary sea monster of gigantic proportions, capable of sinking ships with his tentacles and sowing terror in the sea. He would be Davy Jones in the new era. I can even imagine him modifying his human appearance. He already has that characteristic beard. Can you imagine if in hybrid or full form, tentacles come out as a beard? It would be an octopus beard moving on his face in the style of Davy Jones from Pirates of the Caribbean. And who needs facial hair when you can have giant hanging squids? It would be very strange and incredible at the same time. Also, it fits with his last name Teach, which is from the real pirate Blackbeard, Edward Teach, who in the fiction of other media has sometimes been mixed a lot with the legend of Davy Jones. Oda could be making a fantastic medley of pirate references. Blackbeard plus Davy Jones merged into a single character, Marshall D. Teach. It would only be missing for his Zebeck saber ship to become the new Wandering Landais, sailing shrouded in darkness and followed by a tamed Kraken, or being the Kraken himself. At this rate, let's not rule out that in the final battle, Teach summons a dark storm at sea. Luffy has to jump from that sunny from the sun to hit him, and silhouettes of tentacles are seen emerging from the darkness. But if all this weren't enough, think about the symbolism. Luffy is the Rubber Man, the man who became the sun god Nika, liberator, associated with the day, light, hope. Teach would be the man of darkness who becomes the demon of the sea, the Kraken, Davy Jones, the oppressor associated with the night, the depths, fear. One reigns in the sky of free imagination, the other in the dark waters of greed. The confrontation between them would have rich thematic layers, Luffy bringing to light the man who comes from the abyssal darkness. There could even be a big moment, like taking the battle to the sea. We know that fruit users cannot swim, but if you throw a giant Kraken, it might try to fight by submerging half its body in the water, relying on its monstrous endurance, dragging Luffy into the water to drown him. It would be an incredible madness, and Luffy may be using his Onika Sun powers to, I don't know, evaporate water or something creative. This is already maximum speculation, but come on, the imagination flies with this idea. With the narrative and visual clues in hand, it's not hard to get on board or on the octopus of this theory. I repeat it concisely, Blackbeard has a huge thematic connection with octopuses, the Kraken. Oda has given biological hints of the number 3, the strange body, the insomnia, which fit perfectly, and now he gives us the direct reference to Davy Jones through Teach's father, almost shouting to us that the legacy of that cursed pirate will live on in someone, and that someone reeks of Blackbeard. In the upcoming chapters, we might see even more signs, maybe someone mentioning that Teach is after a sunken treasure of Davy Jones or something like that. A flashback of young Teach studying sea legends? I can already imagine anything. I'm super hyped. So, summarizing this whole theory festival, Marshall D. Teach's third devil fruit is going to be, or already is, a mythological form, model Kraken, legendary giant octopus. This fruit would explain all the mysteries surrounding Blackbeard because he can have multiple powers without dying. 3 hearts for 3 fruits, lineage factor altered by the tune. Why his body is strange, according to Marco the Phoenix, he would have octopus biology with semi-autonomous parts. Perhaps more than one spirit in the body. Why he never sleeps, a characteristic of octopuses. Why he feels so much pain and is somewhat clumsy. Disadvantages of being a humanoid octopus. Why he wants that fruit for the regeneration aspect. And why Odal has surrounded it with the number 3 symbolically. It fits better than the straw hat on Luffy's head. And not only that, the Kraken fruit turns Blackbeard into the modern incarnation of Davy Jones, the myth of the Sea Terror pirate. Thanks to the revelation of Rock's D. Zebeck and his admiration for Davy Jones, we now know that this legend is relevant in the story. Teach, as the son of Rocks, is practically destined to take up that mantle, and he would be the perfect final villain. A pirate who combines the worst of the land, earthquakes that destroy islands, the worst of the sky, darkness that swallows light, and the worst of the sea, a Kraken that sinks ships. Who the hell is gonna stop a monster like that? Well, our dear Monkey D, who by then will be the other side of the coin, the sun god, with power over rubber, imagination, and perhaps the fire of liberation. Who knows? Clash of Titans guaranteed. Now, it is true that Oda can always troll us and come up with something totally unexpected, but honestly, if tomorrow a chapter came out confirming that Teach sprouts tentacles from his back and says, I have the Taco Taco no Mi model Kraken, no one who has followed these clues would be too surprised. Rather, we would shout, I knew it, while pulling our hair in excitement because it would be one of those glorious moments when Oda rewards years of foreshadowing, errors or outdated ideas from previous concepts. Well, we already saw that thinking about Cerberus's hippos, or that falls short of what we have now. This Kraken thing takes the best of each theory and unifies it for you. It gives you the 3-headed dog. It gives you the marine aspect of the hippopotamus. It gives you a mythological form like those of Kaido, Marco, or Orochi as original, but never seen before. It gives you a final villain totally terrifying in aesthetics and power, and on top of that, it connects with the meta history of Davy Jones. It's perfect. Personally, I love imagining people's reactions when it's revealed in the world of One Piece. The Marines shouting, what the hell is that and they're watching Teach in Kraken form ravaging a port. The Straw Hat's going completely crazy. Did he turn into a giant squid? Is it a Kraken? Luffy saying, it's like Tsurume, but uglier. It would be a moment worthy of a final saga, and Oda knows how to give us visual spectac. So people, start mentally preparing for Blackbeard with tentacles. It may sound crazy, but now everything is there and all the details point to it. All the old details, like the new revelations. If we turn out to be wrong, hey, at least we had fun putting this puzzle together, but I honestly believe it 100%. Blackbeard will be the mythological Kraken that rules the darkness in the seas. Just imagine the final battle, Luffy in Nika form, shining like the dawn, laughing, doing crazy rubber things. In front of him, Teach, in the hybrid form of the Kraken, with a dark aura, tentacles striking the ground, roaring, shouting, the two bearers of the will of Dai, the sun against the moon. It will be epic, terrifying, exciting, and when Luffy defeats him, because Luffy is going to defeat him, he would not only defeat the last great enemy, he would defeat the very legend of Davy Jones. He would free the world from the darkness of the abyss, bring the new dawn, and wow, it gives me goosebumps just thinking about it. And we're going to talk about the Ancient Kingdom. We all somewhat understand what the Ancient Kingdom was. It was a very powerful, very ancient civilization that existed during the Void Century and had technological power that was incredible. Technology that is even far more advanced than things we have seen today. This was even mentioned by a person already ahead of us, like Dr. Vegapunk. And while it's true we don't have much information about the Ancient Kingdom, we have enough to know this. We also know that this Ancient Kingdom was destroyed during the Void Century, probably by the world government, and they were enemies of them. But Eiichiro Oda, the creator of One Piece, has made sure to give us information about this ancient kingdom drop by drop over more than 1,000 chapters, without making the most important parts clear. Then a theory arises that could completely change everything we know about One Piece and everything we believe. And the theory suggests that maybe we are wrong, as the perception of the fandom in general is that the world government has always been the bad side and that the ancient kingdom was the good side, that they were the good ones, the ones who lost, and that those who won, well, they are the bad ones. So what if this is completely reversed? This is perhaps one of the craziest theories out there, but there are also arguments to consider this. The fact is that Oda, every time he has talked about the ancient kingdom, Joy Boy, or the world government, has made it clear that neither is good nor bad. He has not dared to commit, and a very clear case is when Vegapunk, who is telling us about the history he has discovered of the ancient kingdom, the Void Century and everything, we see that he doesn't take sides and says he doesn't dare to say who is the good one or who is the bad one, and he simply tells us a part of the story, and Oda has done this throughout the whole work. The thing is that if it really is something like we think, it would be very easy to make it clear from the first moment, since it is something that all the fandom assumes. That is to say, it wouldn't be a very drastic change for the work if they confirmed it, as it would simply be an Okay, so we were right, but instead, Oda, as I said, has remained very distant from this, simply providing very little information and addressing other topics without mentioning if they are the good guys or the bad guys. So as I said, the theory says that the ancient kingdom would be the bad guys and that the world government would be the good guys, something that obviously, if true, would completely change the entire paradigm of the series. Now, does this make sense or is it just nonsense? Well, even though it may sound far-fetched, it could be something that makes sense, since the first argument used to justify this theory is precisely what I mentioned, and it's the little information that the author of One Piece has given from this kingdom, especially focusing on whether they were the good ones or the bad ones. We have it in our heads right now that the world government are the bad ones because we see them doing negative things, but it is also true that we are seeing it from one point of view, and perhaps they are doing it for a greater good, even though obviously their actions would not be justified, but we could understand why they do them. And Oda throughout the work has made sure to show us that there are neither good guys nor bad guys, since not even the pirates are the bad ones, using the Straw Hats as an example, or the Marines are the good ones, using as an example people like Akainu, who act in a very brutal way. And in fact, Doflamingo's famous speech about good and evil is something absolutely key, as he mentions that basically the people who win, the people who have power, the people who win the war are the ones who decide what is right and what is wrong. But one thing is what is decided, and another thing is what the reality is. Who is good? Who is bad? Being on one side makes you bad, being on the other side makes you good. Well, Oda has been playing with this for more than 1,000 chapters, so according to this theory, it could be that the ancient kingdom were the bad ones, the world government won, and now we are living a lie thinking that the world government are the bad ones. I know at first it might sound completely crazy, and I'm not saying I'm in favor of this theory, but it is true that I see certain arguments that could be very interesting if Oda decides to apply them and decide to expand them to provoke a plot twist. And let's be honest, if one morning you wake up, start reading the One Piece manga chapter, and it reveals that the ancient kingdom were the bad guys and that the world government won and they were the good guys, then it would completely blow your mind. You would be totally surprised, and it would be one of the biggest plot twists in One Piece. And you couldn't say anything to Oda because he has never clearly stated who is the good guy or who is the bad guy, as he has always played a lot with ambiguity, giving rise to this type of theory as well. So as a first theory, I think it's something that's certainly far-fetched, absolutely, but it's also something that could happen. And here, what I want is for you to leave in the comments right now whether you agree with this theory or not. If it had crossed your mind, if you have anything to argue for or against the theory, leave it in the comments. And now, let's move on to the second one. And with the second, we go to something that I think everyone at some point has theorized about things close to this. And it is something that Oda has shown us very clearly. It's something I vividly remember my reaction to when I read it. I remember being in the gym with a friend and reading the One Piece chapter between sets. And when I read it, I was just frozen for a minute or two. And my friend asked me what was going on. Then I had to explain the scene to him, and he, who hadn't watched One Piece, looked at me like, "You're crazy." Today, I have managed to get him up to date with the One Piece manga, and when he saw that, he felt the same as I did and said to me, "Now I understand you," and what I'm talking about is the Reverie arc. I'm specifically talking about the scene where we see Imu, who comes down with Luffy's bounty to a room. And we see that he opens a door and encounters a cold chamber, a frozen chamber. And we see that there's some sort of shelf, and on top there's a giant straw hat, just like Luffy's, frozen. And as a result of this, obviously many theories have emerged. But the one I'm going to present now is a theory that using this argument can suggest that, well, something very crazy could come out of it. The theory basically says that this is nothing more than a foreshadowing from Oda, making it clear that Joy Boy did not die and is frozen there. Yes, just as you hear it, Joy Boy did not die and is frozen there. I know that many people might say that this doesn't make sense, that there are several arguments that couldn't come out, and we would need to see how he is. And the first thing is that it is supposed that Luffy could not have the Nika fruit, since we assume that Joy Boy had that fruit. But the theory suggests that we do not have 100% knowledge of the devil fruits, and that we don't know exactly to what extent they can be used one way or another. That is to say, if a person is frozen to the point where they are really dead, the fruit could emerge, and then when thawed, that person, it wouldn't be dead, but rather, as I say, it would be cryogenically preserved. But the fruit would have already left their body, and it would be a way to extract it. Another thing that is also mentioned is that Joy Boy's will could not have been inherited by other people. And here it goes back to the same. According to the theory, since Joy Boy at that moment would technically be dead, but then would not die due to the same issue of being able to defrost him, then here they go into different variations saying other things about Joy Boy, since there are people saying that maybe the government will use him as a weapon, some saying he'll be used as a slave, some saying he won't have relevance. There are many variations here. I have to say that for me, the idea that Joy Boy is frozen, I don't completely dislike it, but I don't think he's alive. I believe that Joy Boy did indeed die during the Void Century, and I think at most we could see his hat, his head, something of his body as it is frozen, and that they have something there, maybe his own bones, but some memory of that first Joy Boy might make sense that Emu has it frozen there in the chamber. But to my surprise, when I started looking for theories about the Void Century in One Piece, this is one of the most powerful ones I saw, and it surprised me, as there were many people think that Joy Boy did not die, that he is there frozen. But well, it's normal because this cold storage room, along with that giant hat, has brought 1,000 mysteries and 1,000 theories. And I want you to leave in the comments not only whether you think Joy Boy is alive or dead, but also your opinion and your comment on what you think about the giant hat, the freezing, and the whole chamber. What do you think about this? Leave it in the comments, and let's move on to the third theory. Let's move on to the third theory, focusing on one of the most important characters in One Piece to date, and also one of the least understood. We're going to talk about the character Emu. I think it's essential that if we discuss the Void Century, we have to mention Emu along the way. It makes perfect sense. And about Emu, as I say, there are many theories, many. And of course, not knowing anything, we could theorize about everything, as is the case with this character, but here they are going to go a bit further. They are going to try to specify it, and this theory aims to explain the entire meaning of Emu, their entire presence, their entire position in the world government, all the explanation they have, all their past and their connection, not only, as I said, with the Void Century, but with the Ancient Kingdom and the entire mystery of the world of One Piece, as the theory says that Emu is someone from the DClan. People whose secret we do not know today. We do not know what makes them special, but we see they have a D in their name. And today, we still have no idea of its meaning. But this theory goes a bit further. It not only mentions that Emu could be a D, which I have indeed seen several people comment on, but they say that Emu is a D who betrayed the Ancient Kingdom. The theory is basically that Emu was an inhabitant of the Ancient Kingdom, a person from the D-Clan. Like it could be Kurohige, like Jaguar D. Saul, or like the captain of the Straw Hats, Monkey D. Luffy. But that Emu at some point decided to betray the Ancient Kingdom. Why? For power, to take control of the world government, to create the world government, and to take control of the world, something that finally, over these 800 years, we have seen has gone well for him, and he has achieved it. So this theory suggests that Emu could be the precursor of it all, and could be the key to the start of the revolution, the start of the fall of the Ancient Kingdom, and the beginning of the rise of the world government. Does this make any sense? Well, if we analyze it coldly, I think it does. Oda has taken great care in everything he does with Emu. Carefully shows all his moves, tries not to show more than necessary, tries to teach just enough. And when he has to show something more, it's clear that he has measured it well and believes it's the right moment. Notice that to this day, we still don't know Emu's name, and to this day, we still don't know what happens to him. It is true that we have heard rumors within the work itself, but they are still just rumors. We don't know their face, we don't know their gender, and we have no idea what happens with this character. So when we see a character that is so well crafted, and knowing that we are nearing the end of One Piece, and that one of the great mysteries we have is not only the entire Void Century, but the Ancient Kingdom. What happens with the D? What happens with Imu? Seeing that this theory could connect several pieces at once and explain to us what the meaning of D is. From Imu, what happened with the Ancient Kingdom from Imu, and who is Imu? Obviously from Imu. Well, it would be a great way to do it. It would be like you were playing bowling and got a strike on the first throw. It would be a very good way to do it. So knowing how Oda is, the care he takes with all the mysteries of the work, how he likes to play with us, play with our minds, include foreshadowing, and the attention he has given to everything about Imu, the Ancient Kingdom, and the Void Century, I think this theory makes quite a bit of sense. Now, whether I believe it or not, well, I have my own thoughts about Imu, I have my own thoughts about the world government and the Ancient Kingdom, but as a theory, it makes sense. And if at some point Imu says he is like one of the original D, who knows what the meaning is, the name, because he or she may have even put it, the meaning of the D. And also explain why he betrayed the Ancient Kingdom, what the Ancient Kingdom was, or even if we go crazy and hopefully it happens, Oda, please listen to me, having a flashback of a couple of chapters of Imu through the Ancient Kingdom, seeing firsthand how he betrayed the Ancient Kingdom and how he was creating the world government. Why he did that and explaining everything, that could be crazy. It could break the internet and blow all our minds. So it's something that, whether I believe the theory or not, truly, I would love it, and I would really put money out of my pocket to make this happen. But what do you think? Do you agree with the theory? Do you think Imu could be a traitor of the Ancient Kingdom? Do you think Imu could be a D, who directly betrayed and created everything? And above all, would you like it? Because one thing is what you believe, and another is what you would like. Leave me a comment, and now let's move on to the fourth theory. The fourth theory is something very interesting and something that once again focuses on the Ancient Kingdom. When we talk about the Void Century, there are several topics to address, and one of them is the Ancient Kingdom. But we are going to get to the root of something. We are going to discuss something that is one of the things that make it particularly special to all of One Piece. And just like in Naruto we have the jutsus, or in Dragon Ball we have the Kamehameha and the Dragon Balls, it's true that in One Piece we have something that makes it very different from the rest. And it's a very characteristic thing, especially concerning powers, and it's obviously the devil fruits, the well-known Akuma no Mi. These fruits, like anything in One Piece that comes a bit from the past, are surrounded by an aura of mystery that Oda seems determined. Well, throw us 3 or 4 things, but it's still not the time to resolve it, and it seems that it's going to wait until chapter 1500 to explain it, and at this pace, I see it possible. The thing is that this theory talks about the explanation of the devil fruits being that they were created by the Ancient Kingdom. Then this theory develops a bit further, obviously, but this is like the basis, saying that these fruits come from the Ancient Kingdom and originate from the Void Century. I think if we talk about the fruits and consider that they come from the Void Century, I think it's quite logical that yes, but in my opinion, they could even come from a bit further back based on what's shown in the murals of Elba. But as I said, this theory talks about the devil fruits being created in the Void Century and were created by this Ancient Kingdom. As I said at the beginning of the video, one of the few things we are somewhat clear about regarding the Ancient Kingdom is that it was something that was very advanced compared to the rest, but very, very, very advanced to the point that, as I said, not even Vegapunk was able to match it and was many years away from its intellect, with Vegapunk being a person who is too intelligent. But even Vegapunk, when asked about the fruits, he was not able to provide a convincing explanation. He merely limited himself to saying certain theories he had, which weren't too scientific either, but he did make it clear that he had been able to copy certain fruits when creating the Seraphim, which would indicate to us, according to this theory, that the fruits are artificial. And if Vegapunk was able to replicate them, being able to do a kind of reverse engineering with things that are already created to create them from scratch would require much more technology, which would explain that they were created in the Ancient Kingdom, in a kingdom with many more laboratories, with much more technology, with many more scientists, and with people with much more development capacity creating these fruits. So this theory makes sense to me. I think it's quite logical and fairly obvious that it does. I believe what would be very interesting is to try to find out why, because it seems that these fruits were created in the Ancient Kingdom. We all agree it could be like that, more or less, but we also have to think about why that kingdom would create the fruits. And if they created them as weapons, why did they lose? How did they lose with these things? Did they create them in response to an attack from the world government, or is there something else behind it? I think the topic of the fruits, being one of the central pillars of One Piece, could have another layer of depth, not just who created them, but why, and that the reason why is very, very key. In my opinion, I think it would be totally crazy. I think it would be very, very top-notch, and I would really love for it to be explained. But it's true that seeing how the work progresses, it seems Oda is going to save it for a little further in the future. Hopefully not too much, but seeing how the chapters of One Piece are advancing, it seems there's still quite a bit left to talk about this. So, well, I have to say that I like the theory. I do buy that the fruits were created during the Void Century, and it's true that I have some ideas, but I don't want to share them in this video because we're going to talk about theories of the Void Century. In contrast, if you have any ideas about the fruits or something to say about the theory, leave it in the comments because you know I will read it. And now let's move on to the fifth theory. And now, pay attention, because we're going to the madhouse. We're getting a straitjacket, going into a padded room, and staying there for a long time, because we're going to discuss a theory that is too crazy, and if it happens, I don't know what reaction the audience would have. In general, and especially the more devoted One Piece fans, so to speak. And it's that the theory talks of obviously the protagonist of the Void Century, who was Joy Boy, with the permission of Emu, I suppose, and it also talks about our protagonist. And we have seen that obviously Luffy is a parallel to Joy Boy. We have seen that he seems to have the same inherited will when we have seen Joy Boy, even if only in silhouettes. We have seen that he is very similar to Luffy, too similar to Luffy. We see that it seems he wore the same hat. It also seems he had the same fruit. Let's say many similarities, and this is justified with the inherited will, which we have seen throughout the whole work, which Oda has taken care to explain, and Oda loves to do this. You can see he loves the theme of inherited will, and which we have seen with other characters, since when we saw Oden's flashback, we saw Roger's, and we felt that it was very similar to Luffy, with several parallels, even in some scenes or behaviors. So I think this makes a lot of sense, seeing the inherited will from one person to another. And as I say, seeing the inherited will of Luffy that we saw in Roger, it makes a lot of sense that this will comes from way back, and that just like Roger and Luffy, Joy Boy was also involved. But the theory tries to explain it in a way, well, more crazy, less realistic, and, well, much less based on things from the manga, but which also, to my surprise, makes a lot of sense. And, well, I don't know if everyone will like it. The thing is that the theory says there is so much parallelism between Joy Boy and Luffy. There are so many similarities. There are so many coincidences because they are the same person. This is crazy, I know. You're gonna say, well, what are you doing? Stop drinking, stop the alcohol. No, let's see. The theory says that Joy Boy and Luffy are indeed the same person, that this Joy Boy we have seen in memories, that we have seen on the mural, that Nika we have seen so many times is simply Luffy. He has the same fruit, he has the same power, such and such. It's the same, it's exactly the same. This would even explain why Emmett got confused upon seeing him, saying, hey, you are Joy Boy. And Luffy was like, what do you mean Joy Boy? What are you telling me? Who are you? But obviously you might say, but this can't be because Joy Boy lived at least 800 years ago, and Luffy, well, is obviously living now. Alright, so the theory talks about time travel. I know someone will say, well, this doesn't make sense. Let's pause for a moment. We've seen the character Toki, who was able to send people to the future, and even jump to the future herself. So, if we have seen people jump to the future, why couldn't there be people who jump to the past? The idea is that at some point, both Luffy and all the Straw Hats, they will travel to the past, and we will have an arc, which will be the Void Century, but it won't be a flashback. Instead, we will experience it, we will see the Void Century firsthand, and this would explain the entire work of One Piece. Oda wouldn't bother to create a flashback of the Void Century to explain it in a very brief, very undetailed way. And seeing it from someone's point of view, but would send the Straw Hats to the Void Century, we would be there and see everything firsthand, because we wouldn't just see how it happens, but we would make it happen, which would be really crazy. This, as I say, may sound very crazy, but the idea is that One Piece would be a loop. That is, Luffy would be born inheriting Roger's will, who in turn would inherit it from various people, who would be the same Luffy. At some point, Luffy would go so far that he would travel to the past, go back, become Joy Boy, and would be the very person who would make the will be inherited. And outward facing the future, and in this way, it would be a loop. The only thing I don't like about this theory, apart from the fact that obviously it's a very big madness, and I don't know if this could turn out well, is that it is specified to us that the world government won that war and the others lost. So if this were a loop, we couldn't win because Luffy would travel to the past, and then everything would be a loop for Luffy. Fought, lost that fight, and returned to the present and lost again, and so on, and it would all be a loop all the time, which would make no sense because the good guys wouldn't win. And being One Piece, it doesn't quite fit because if you haven't noticed, Oda usually makes sure that the good guys win and everything ends well. Why? Because he wants to have a banquet, you know, the famous banquet at the end of each arc. And personally, it's one of the things I like the most. I mean, Oda, very well, keep going that way. But the theory that the world is a loop, that Luffy can travel to the past and so on, to my surprise, has too many positives and too many good points. And if you analyze it from a neutral standpoint, there's the topic of time travel, which is explained with the topic of Toki. And there are all the extreme similarities between Joy Boy and Luffy, because you see Roger and you see Luffy, and you see they look alike, but you can tell them apart. But of Joy Boy, what we've seen is that he is literally Luffy. So there are many concerns with this, and I don't know what could happen. I don't think it will happen because I believe it would be getting into a very tricky situation, and especially because when you introduce time travel to the past, paradoxes and very bad things can be created. It's very difficult to execute a time travel work that involves traveling to the past and changing the present. It's quite complicated. That's why I think Oda did well by introducing travels to the future. Because this way you don't alter the past. I don't know how it would happen, but well, the theory seems super interesting to me. That's why I wanted to bring it up. I wanted to develop it a bit more. And above all, I want you to leave a little comment about what you think of this theory, if you like it or not, and if you would include it in the work. Now, let's move on to the sixth theory. This sixth theory is something very interesting that could happen, and perhaps isn't so far-fetched within what One Piece is. It's still a slightly crazy theory, and it brings us back to the character of Joy Boy. Don't worry, there are no time travels now. The idea is that, as I say, we don't know much about this character. I repeat that we only know he lived in the Void Century, that he seemingly had the Nika fruit, that he resembled Luffy, and that's it. And this is related to various mysteries that might exist in the world of One Piece. And if we look closely as we have progressed through the entire map of One Piece, there are some very crazy things, islands that do not make sense, things that are like magic. And One Piece has a world, and islands that seem taken out of that, a fairy tale, they seem like islands that are fake. And among so many things, Oda may have included something that is not simply natural to the world of One Piece, but it has a consequence. Something that is placed there very subtly to surprise you, obviously, but since it's the world of One Piece, you say, ah, what a cool place. That's it. And the theory talks about there being a very strong connection, important, between the character Joy Boy and Enies Lobby Island. What's going on with Enies Lobby? Some might ask, why? What connection is there? Enies Lobby is a very strange island. It's a very, very curious place. As we see, there is an island marked with the stone path suspended in the air. There is a very large hole below, and it's a place where it's always sunny. It's a place very, very strange. Perhaps it goes a bit unnoticed because in that arc, we see Robin recount the Ohara flashback, saying the now famous line, "I want to live." We have great battles of the Straw Hats against the CP9, with fights that are utterly legendary, and for me, the best in One Piece. That is Luffy versus Lucci. We also have the Mary going to help the Straw Hats escape. In other words, it's an arc that has many things, and maybe Oda didn't do this just because, but on purpose to distract us a bit. He throws these things in here. Why? Because the entire island of Enies Lobby is very, very key. And let's analyze again everything I've said. It's an island with a very strange structure, with a hole underneath. A giant that no one notices and is there, and above all, it's sunny all day. At first we can't find much explanation for the sun, but maybe for the hole, yes. And it's because after they used the Mother Flame in Lulusia, we can infer, we can assume that this weapon was also used in Enies Lobby. If it was used in Enies Lobby, we justify the hole, but it doesn't explain why the island is half built. That is to say, that weapon should have destroyed Enies Lobby Island. And also, why is it always sunny there? None of this is explained. It doesn't make any sense. Well, this crazy theory connects Enies Lobby with Joy Boy, with an action, with a moment, and with a thing, making everything make sense within the logic of this theory. And the theory says that Joy Boy in the Void Century fought at Enies Lobby against the world government, just like Luffy did. But at some point, the world government decided to use the Mother Flame in its version, probably at 100%, not a part as it is supposed to have been used. in Lulusia and decided to use it against the entire island of Enies lobby. But at that moment, Joy Boy, seeing that all his Nakama, all his friends, all the people there were going to die, he stretched his body with the Nika fruit, wrapped it around the island of Enies lobby, and protected it. And that's why we see there is a huge hole, because it did not cover the entire surface, but only that part of the island. That's why the island would still be standing, because it's the part that Joy Boy could wrap, and that he withstood the impact, but Joy Boy died at that moment. He withstood the impact, but after returning to his normal state, after stretching, he died. And this would justify why there is always sun, because having the fruit of the sun god, which we know is now the fruit that has Luffy and that Joy Boy had, well, this caused his will in some way to always remain and made it so that there was always sun. Why? Because as I say, that's where the sun god died. I know it might sound a bit out there, but let's see. We are on an island that, as I said, doesn't have a logical explanation. There are too many crazy things. Some might think this doesn't make sense, but I challenge you to give me a more logical explanation than this. Personally, I think it's a theory I can believe. I'm not saying it will definitely be this way, but I think I've never found myself an explanation for all the strange phenomena that occur on this island that I believe that find meaning and say, okay, that seems fine to me. And this makes a lot of sense, especially as I say, the death of Joy Boy causing there to always be sun. I think that's what convinces me the most, because I can't think of any way to make it always sunny. Mainly because obviously when it's night, the sun shouldn't be shining at that point in the world. But of course, if perhaps Joy Boy died there, it makes it so there's always sun, because his will somehow created a kind of sun. Artificial. And also about the hole, about the island, and the wrapping around it is something that makes a lot of sense. Explaining about the fruit, explaining the hole, and above all, blowing our minds as Oda usually does with these things. Even though it is a very crazy theory, it is quite little known. When I saw it, I was surprised because I had never heard it before, and honestly, I liked it. But I want you to leave in the comments right now if you agree with the theory, if you like it or not. And now, let's move on to the 7th theory, and there is a character from the Void Century, of whom we haven't said anything, and we have covered 6 theories. There are very few characters we know who lived in the Void Century, and of whom we have some minimum knowledge. As I said, Emu, Joy Boy, and the Ancient Kingdom as a general concept, but we forget a character who seems a bit overlooked, but we do know that this person is much older than the Void Century. Going to the murals of Elba, it could directly go to the first world we were taught in the texts, but this is a little further, and it's the character of Zunesha. Yes, that giant elephant that destroyed Jack's ships just by swinging its trunk. And this character is mentioned to be over a C-1,000 years old, which is insanely powerful, very beastly, serving a punishment for something he did but we don't know what, carrying the entire mink tribe on his back. And as an interesting fact, we saw that Joy Boy and Emu were on top of him when we saw him in the flashback, as they are on one of the pillars we see there. But as I mentioned, we haven't said absolutely anything about this character despite him having gone through the Void Century. So we need to discuss something about him, and I'm not going to tell you exactly what punishment he committed or why he is walking, but I will talk about the explanation. And let's pause for a moment. Zunesha is something completely different from anything we have seen in One Piece. I mean, it's too big. I mean, it's massively big. The only thing we saw similar is what we saw in Thriller Bark, where we saw some shadows that to this day have no explanation. So I don't know how to justify whether it is bigger or smaller than Zunesha. I don't know, but I think it's the only thing we can see that resembles it. But that elephant is truly excessively large. So what about this? What is the theory? The theory tries to justify what Zunesha is as a concept in general, and the theory says that Zunesha is an ancient weapon that ate a devil fruit. Some will say this doesn't make sense because in theory there are only 3 ancient weapons. We know them well, and we have already seen them all and know where they are. We know that Poseidon is Shirahoshi, we know that Pluton is hidden in Wano, and we assume that Uranus is the weapon used by the world government or something along the style. So it doesn't make any sense for Zunesha to be an ancient weapon. But of course, we have to lay our cards on the table, and we must consider that obviously these weapons could be replicable. So who's to say that the original Pluton, for example, is not Zunesha? Just as an example, it could be any of the other 2, and that they are weapons that could be replicable, and that Zunesha could be the first one, or it could be as simple as it being a 4th ancient weapon that we do not know, and that this character was given a devil fruit and became Zunesha. The theory, at first, as I say, might sound very crazy, but there is an interesting argument that could lead us to this, and that is Spandam's sword. Fangfrey, and this sword had a fruit. Do you remember which one it was? Indeed, the elephant one. And this, it could be one of the many foreshadows Oda includes to justify things later, and in a place like Enies lobby, with characters so linked to the world government and a character like Spandam, it wouldn't make much sense for them to give us a hint, a clue about something we'll see later, and in this case, make the formula of the sword eating an elephant fruit repeat itself again. Perhaps it is something similar, that maybe that ancient weapon also ate an elephant fruit a long time ago. So much time. I know someone will say that there are no two devil fruits alike, but as I say, Zunesha comes from more than 1,000 years ago. So, who tells you that at that moment they couldn't create two fruits? And since Zunesha had eaten one, they decided to replicate it, and that's how the other one Spandam has was created. As I said, this is what the theory says, and it makes a lot of sense. So the theory explains that at some point Oda would reveal Zunesha's true identity, and that it would be, as I said, an ancient weapon that ate us devil fruit. Personally, I must say that the theory doesn't fully convince me, but the arguments are there, and I believe they are presented in a way that if Oda deciding to explain it and include it in the work makes sense, and I think that's the most important thing when creating a theory. So even though I don't like it, the facts are there and it's possible. So let me know in the comments what you think about this, and let's move on to the eighth theory. And now yes, we're gonna talk about a place, but we're not gonna talk about the ancient kingdom, or maybe we will, and we're gonna talk about an island that perhaps could have a slightly more curious secret than we think. As of today, we practically know all the islands that are the world of One Piece, or in the most important ones we've already been, but the only ones we have left to see within the manga, they are Lodestar and Laughtale, with the exception of God Valley, which we don't know what happened to it. And this theory talks about the island of Laughtale with something curious. We still have several chapters to visit Laughtale. We know little about Laughtale. We only know that it is where the One Piece is, in case, what if that were not enough, and that Roger visited it and no one else can find it. So we know that this island has something different from the rest, as I say, not only because of the importance of having the One Piece, which is a treasure left by Joy Boy, but also because it seems that this island is hidden from the eyes of the world. And it is very complicated that with all the people in the world of One Piece navigating the sea, no one has found it by chance. Only Roger found it, and to find it, we have to get the 4 red pony glyphs, read them, and then trace a map to reach the island, which is perfect. But the idea that this theory has is that this makes Laughtale a much more special island than we initially thought, because let's see, why would this island hide in such a way? Why would so many things have to be done to find an island? Why do we have to read 4 red poneglyphs and do 1,000 things to reach the island? And if that's the case, how was it found the first time? Because I mean, once you have the 4 red poneglyphs, okay, it's perfect that you can reach the island, but how did they arrive at Laughtale the first time, if no one had written them? I mean, the first time someone arrived, did they have to take all those steps, or do all those things mentioned there? And as I said, it doesn't seem like someone found it by chance. So the theory, this idea, suggests that maybe this island is artificially created. By whom? By the kingdom. Ancient. I repeat that the ancient kingdom had technology and things that we cannot imagine today. We have seen many crazy things in the world of One Piece. Even Vegapunk has called them crazier than anything the world government did, things that were very advanced for their time. So from this, we have to consider that it is possible they created an island, and especially that might be that they hid it. And this makes a lot of sense. Let's think, if the ancient kingdom was involved in the poneglyphs, in their creation, in all the writing, and in distributing them through, the world, as we assume with the red poneglyphs, should be the same. And if they also created the red poneglyphs and gave the instructions to find Laughtale, it's probably because they hid the island. So what if this is an artificial island created by the kingdom? Ancient, hidden by the ancient kingdom, made in such a way that no one can find it. Joy Boy, who would surely be the mastermind or the most important person of that kingdom, left the most important thing there, and they left it on an island as a secret so that no one could find it, hiding them manually, making sure that effectively nobody could find it by chance because they trusted themselves to hide it. And this would drive people crazy looking for the island with no way to find it. Why? Because it is not an island. Natural. It's not something you're gonna find by chance. It's something that's purposely hidden to be able to find it only those who deserve it. And this this theory makes too much sense. It explains all the problems with Laughtale, explains all the mystery that may surround the ancient kingdom, and explains why nothing of Laughtale has been shown to us. Why? Because perhaps if we see the island of Laughtale and how it is, and if we see certain things from that island, we can find out that it is an island that is artificially created, when this is something that is not very much in the mind of the people, since as the island is talked about as just another island, well, it seems to be a natural island that cannot be reached by circumstances of life. But as I say, it makes no sense that they found it in the first place and then deal with the poneglyphs. It would have to be that they have hidden the island. It's something that makes perfect sense. And this theory, as I say, I like so much and I buy into it so much because it's my theory. It's a theory I've decided to include in the video because I am very convinced of this. I believe the ancient kingdom created this island. I think they hid it themselves. And I think that perhaps the moment Oda is waiting for to reveal things about the ancient kingdom is reaching Laughtale, discovering the history of the island, discovering Joy Boy's treasure, and there we would find out, perhaps not 100%, but the most important part of the history of the ancient kingdom, which for me, in my opinion, would be an absolute cinema, and I would love it. Oda, do that. But above all, I want you to leave me comments about what you think of the theory, if you agree, if not, and if you would change something, perhaps. Now, let's move on with the 9th theory. The 9th theory is the most important theory of the entire video because it would cause changes in the world of One Piece that would be crazy and would have already triggered them. And this theory justifies many things that have been told to us in the work, which we are not able to justify, and that could solve mysteries from the entire Void Century and from over 800 years ago. And this theory comes from a premise. The world of One Piece, as we know it, has not always been oriented in the same way. That is, the current distribution of islands, oceans, currents, climates, and even the red line or the calm belt could be the result of a brutal cataclysm that changed the orientation of the planet's poles. We're not talking about a simple earthquake, but a geological event, or an energy event on a planetary scale that rotated the globe on its axis, altering the north and south. And what does this have to do with the Void Century, Joy Boy, or Ibu? Quite a lot. This theory suggests that the Void Century was not a war, it was a cataclysm. During those 100 years erased from official history, there wasn't just a war between the ancient kingdom and the 20 allied kingdoms, the predecessors to the world government, but what also happened in parallel was a geological event. Brutal. There was a pole shift, either literally magnetic or physical, in the rotation of the planetary axis, which totally reconfigured the world. The sea level rose, islands disappeared, the climate changed, and most importantly, the ancient kingdom was erased from the map, not just by the war, but because its location was submerged, displaced, or completely inaccessible. In other words, at some point, the world of One Piece was turned and all the poles were moved, causing a huge disaster. Now, why would this theory make any sense that it happened in One Piece? Let's look at some strange, a bit curious things in the world of One Piece that would be easily explained if this event had occurred. First, the red line. It's a mountain range. It stretches for thousands of kilometers, encircling the entire world in the form of a ring. And if this did not exist before the Void Century and was created as a result of the cataclysm, since it is supposed that if this occurred in the real world, all the landmass would gather around the Earth, just like the case of the red line. Then we have the calm belts, 2 strips of sea without wind, impossible to traverse, that also cross the entire world. And what if they are areas directly affected by the change in the planet's orientation? Another thing that would be justified. Then the Grand Line, its absurd climate, its currents, its storms, all of it could be a direct consequence of the planetary readjustment and the pole shift. And something even curious, the Sky Islands and their ruins. And it's that many civilizations destroyed in ancient times, they seem to be in the sky. And beyond the knock-up streams, what if they were thrown into the sky by a brutal geological force, like being launched due to the movement of the Earth's crust, or a colossal eruption related to the pole shift? That is, as a result of it stopping, well, everything was thrown and parts of civilizations were launched into the sky and remained on those islands. And then we could even talk about something else, which would be the Mother Flame. And it is that, of course, with the Mother Flame coming into play, pay attention, because this energy source, which is supposedly infinite, that we saw Vegapunk recreated, if we assume that this energy existed 900 years ago, it is possible that the ancient kingdom used it as a technological and energy core, until perhaps the overload or misuse caused this global cataclysm because of it. Mother Flame, from that sun we saw in the Elba mural, and it's said that the Mother Flame could have been the trigger that destabilized the entire planet. This connects with a possible use as an ancient weapon, an energy source so immense that if it gets out of control, it can cause tectonic plates to collapse, generate global earthquakes and tsunamis, and even change the Earth's rotation. The theory says that the activation or explosion of the mother flame caused the pole shift, and this altered forever the world, marking the beginning of the new order with the world government at the helm. And as we see, this theory seems very crazy, because it is. It's a super crazy theory, but if we think about it, it justifies many things that could have happened in the world of One Piece. The fact that the mother flame exploded, the fact that there was a different event but the poles shifted, are things that might initially seem very crazy, but they help justify many things in the world of One Piece. Now, could this happen within the manga? Well, I believe it could. I personally think this has happened, and that maybe I could justify it with other things I have in my head, but that I will develop more and develop it further later. But I firmly believe that the idea of a pole shift in One Piece makes sense, that the world of One Piece has rotated or something like that has happened, simply because obviously the red line doesn't appear naturally and the gun belt, well, the same. So seeing all these things that could only be explained with a pole shift, I think it's too straightforward not to be true and not exist. But well, I'm aware that it's a far-fetched idea and something too crazy, so let me know in the comments what you think about this. And now let's move on to the 10th theory. Which is one of the most curious and also most interesting. Well, so we are going to talk about where the ancient kingdom is supposed to have been. The ancient kingdom, as of today, we know it is destroyed, that it doesn't exist, or that there is no record, okay? We know that, but where could it have been located before? Oda might have left us some clues. We might have seen where it could be located, or it was simply in the middle of the sea and was devastated. Well, the theory suggests that it is in a place we have already passed, that we have already seen, and that we saw some time ago. A long time. And the theory makes more sense than it seems. And the theory indicates that Shandor was not just a lost city of gold, but rather the very ancient kingdom, the home of Joy Boy, the core of the whole story. Everything starts with Enel's cover story on the moon. It is said that in the past there were 3 human races that were living on the moon: the Shandians, the Skypians, and the Birkins. These races were technologically very advanced and were the ones who created those little robots we saw there, the ones that appear in Enel's mini story. And they were living peacefully until they ran out of resources and had to come down to the earth. And so the Skypians and the Birkins settled on the islands of the sky, like Skypiea. But the Shandians descended to the earth, descended to the sea, to the blue. But the Shandians went further down, landing on an island shaped like a skull, had a very peculiar shape, which was the island of Jaya. Once on Jaya, the Shandians built a majestic city called Shandora, which interestingly enough, Shandora comes from Sanskrit, which would be Chandra, which means moon. That is, a city with a lunar name founded by a race that came from the moon. This already sounds very strange, but come on, it's not a coincidence. Moreover, they also worship the sun god, which fits even more with the figure of Joy Boy, the solar symbolism and everything there is from One Piece. And here comes the big part. That golden city, which many in Jaya believed was a legend, was real. Nolan saw it, Kalgra lived in it, and when it was destroyed, half of the island was launched into the sky by a current, creating what we would later know as the Upper Yard. But why was this city the ancient kingdom? The key to the theory is that Shandora was not just a city, but a complete kingdom. A very powerful kingdom, very advanced with its own culture, writing, and technology. And now get ready, because I am going to give you the justifications given to substantiate that Shandora was the very same ancient kingdom. The first is that they used poneglyphs, and Robin, when she finds the poneglyphs in Shandora, literally says that this city was protecting the history of the world, just like what the ancient kingdom did. The poneglyphs were everywhere in Shandora. There weren't just 1 or 2 like on other islands. It seemed to be part of their everyday language. That is to say, the poneglyph language was the language there. And not only that, the poneglyph language is engraved on the buildings, and that is not seen anywhere else. This confirms that they not only used that language for the poneglyphs, but it was their normal language. So yes, the poneglyphs belonged to the ancient kingdom, and this language was theirs. Another thing is that it was a prosperous civilization before the Void Century. It is mentioned that the city prospered more than 900 years ago, just before the century Void, and it was destroyed 800 years ago, exactly when it ended, at the same time as the ancient kingdom. In other words, the dates match, meaning if Andorra disappears at the same time as the ancient kingdom. Coincidence? I don't think so. Then we have that Jaya was shaped like a skull, and here's a detail that I find a gem, and that is, it's said that the island of Jaya, if you put it together as it was originally before it broke apart, it was shaped like a skull. And what does that have to do with anything? Well, what is the symbol of piracy? The skull, the Jolly Roger. And who was the first pirate in the world according to Vegapunk? Joy Boy. Another connection. So if Joy Boy was from the ancient kingdom, and the ancient kingdom was on an island shaped like a skull, and that island was Jaya, and in Jaya was Shandora, Joy Boy was from Shandora. Therefore, Shandora, it's the ancient kingdom. This would also explain why Mock Town, the current town of Jaya, is so pirate-like. Bars, fights, drunks, crazy stories. because it's built on the ruins of the place where piracy began. They were literally in the cradle of piracy, laughing at him without knowing they are right above. Then we have the worship of the sun god, as Kalgara, the legendary warrior of Shandor, looked very similar to what is later revealed as Nika. We see that he had wild hair, was muscular, smiling, with a spear. It would fit well that the Shandians were the first worshippers of Nika and that Joy Boy was the chosen one of that deity. This would explain why that ancient and forgotten religion of Nika comes precisely from that city, hence the fear of the world government. The ideology of freedom that Nika represented was born in the ancient kingdom, and that is what they wanted to erase. And why did we know nothing about this? Because the world government did everything to erase Shandor from history. It eliminated his records. It probably had something to do with Jaya being blown up into the sky by that current that split the island in half. It hid the poneglyphs that were protected by the descendants of Shandor, and on top of that, controlled the entire history to make it seem like all that were legends, as with Mont Blanc Nolan and the history of Shandor. In conclusion, this theory that Shandor was the ancient kingdom is very good, but very, very good. And it makes sense. It has a basis in the manga. Above all, it makes sense of a lot of things that until now were scattered. The theme of the cult of Nika, the obsession with protecting the poneglyph, the skull shape of Jaya, the importance of Skypia, the symbol of piracy. And I find it great, and I love that it all seems to have evidence. And the best part is how everything fits, from the theme of the moon, with what I've mentioned about Chandra, which means moon, Shandora, and all that, to Mocktown having such a pirate atmosphere. And they laugh at piracy itself, and they laugh at certain things when they are in the cradle of everything. Obviously going through Joy Boy, Nika, the poneglyphs. That is to say, there are too many coincidences. So seeing all this, it becomes quite clear that this is no coincidence, that there are too many things in place, that this seems to be the case, that Shandora is the ancient kingdom, or that it was the capital of the ancient kingdom, like little. And I am very sure that the vast majority of people who have heard this theory, after this you will be very convinced that this is so, and that there is more connection than we thought, that you are convinced that the ancient kingdom is Shandora. And even those who are not in favor of this, who are somewhat against, who are a little skeptical, you can leave it in the comments, because you know I love reading them, and I want you to tell me in the comments what you think about this theory. The world building of One Piece is truly incredible. Eiichiro Oda has introduced us to many characters, each with a different view of the world and unique convictions and motivations. This causes the Straw Hats to constantly encounter individuals whose ideals clash with theirs. In each story arc, we have a different enemy to defeat, from tyrannical pirates to corrupt governments, which makes the series always feel very lively and exciting. But we must not forget that, as rich as the setting is, One Piece is not a real world, but a shonen manga written by Eiichiro Oda. And being a shonen, there are certain narrative elements that are inevitable. In particular, there is always a final villain to face in the final stretch of the work. Since the beginning of One Piece, Oda has both followed and subverted genre conventions. We have seen Luffy and his crew defeat countless villains, each with their own goals. Arlong and his supremacism against humans, Crocodile and his political ambition in Alabasta, Enel, self-proclaimed god of Scipioea, Doflamingo tyrannizing Dressrosa, Kaido seeking an epic war, and many others like them. Each enemy has been different, with ideals opposed to Luffy's, and their downfall has propelled the hero's journey. However, being such an extensive work, it is easy to forget that it follows certain very basic narrative rules of shonen. No matter how different or special One Piece is, there are things that are destined to happen, especially to close the cycle of the story. And among those things is what is commonly referred to as the final villain. In classic adventure and action stories, especially in shonen manga, there is usually a definitive antagonistic force that awaits the protagonist at the end of the journey. One Piece is no exception. No matter how unpredictable its world is, it is natural to expect an epic final battle against an enemy that surpasses all previous ones. That final force that surpasses everything seen so far is what the protagonists must defeat to complete their adventure and fulfill their dreams. Monkey D. Luffy, to become the king of the pirates and free the world, will eventually have to face and defeat this supreme enemy. Over the years, there have been many theories about who that final villain in One Piece would be, and the range of characters is very wide, so there is no shortage of candidates. However, most fans have divided into two main camps in this debate, and one of those camps covers perhaps 70% or more of the speculations. In other words, for many readers, the final villain is, quote, quite predictable. Or at least that's what Oda has made us believe so far. And who is that obvious candidate? Well, it's Emu, the mysterious figure in the shadows of the world government. Ever since being briefly introduced during the Reverie, Emu is shaping up to be a great hidden enemy, possibly the true king of the world in the shadows. In fact, if you ask most fans, they are very clear that Emu will occupy the empty throne as the ultimate villain at the end of the story. And it's not a random idea. There are good reasons within the manga that point to this. But before we move forward with our alternative theory, it's worth reviewing why Emu seems to be the final villain according to most. Let's look point by point at the reasons that have led the public to believe that Emu will be the final enemy. First of all, he is the highest authority in the world. Emu has turned out to be the person with the greatest authority in the entire world government and therefore in the entire world. The very 5 elders of the Gorosei serve him and kneel before him, which means that Emu secretly occupies the empty throne. Symbolically, this places him at the absolute pinnacle of governmental power in One Piece, reflecting the oppressive control of the world government over the world. A final villain who is literally above all other power structures sounds logical. Then we have his connection with the Void Century and Joy Boy. And everything indicates that Emu has been alive for 800 years or more, that he was present in the mysterious Void Century, and it has been strongly suggested that Emu is actually Saint Emu of the Nerona family, one of the original founders of the world government 8 centuries ago. It is theorized that he obtained eternal youth through the operation of the Ope no Mi, which would explain why he continues to rule after so many generations. And this implies that Emu was there during the War of the Void Century, facing Joy Boy and the Ancient Kingdom. In other words, Emu already acted as the great enemy of the will of D in the past, the will that Luffy himself carries today, and it would be poetic for him to continue being so in the present. Another reason is that we have seen it foreshadow an epic final war, as Emu himself has hinted at being the final hurdle to overcome. He has spoken several times about that great war that is coming, mentioning that this conflict will inevitably occur, and that a certain race, the Giants of Elbaf, will be decisive in determining the victor. Emu shows a lot of interest in the Giants, as he ordered the Divine Knights to reach Elbaf as soon as possible, and has even participated personally, possessing Gumko in an attack on this nation, seeking for the Giants to be on their side in the war, or not exist at all. And if the antagonist is concerned about securing the alliance of the most powerful warrior race, it's because they know that in the final battle, their enemies could have them as allies. All this paints Emu as the axis of the culminating war. Another point in favor of Emu as the final villain is that we know practically nothing about him or her. We do not know their face, their true identity, since it could be an alias or a title. We do not know their exact origin or what kind of being they are. We barely know that they are supposed to wear some kind of crown or something like that and sit on the empty throne. We are unaware of their powers. Do they have a devil fruit? Is it a divine ability? Are they even human? This aura of mystery often surrounds the ultimate enemy in many stories, keeping readers intrigued until the climax. Furthermore, although in recent chapters the name Nerona Emu was mentioned, associating it with a member of the Founders, it has not been specifically confirmed that Emu is Nerona Emu. And knowing how One Piece is and how Oda is, we cannot trust anything 100% until it is clearly revealed. But that lack of information fits with the idea of a secret final villain who would be revealed at the last moment. Then we have seen that Emu is the author of never before seen atrocities. Emu has already demonstrated terrifying power, even with brief appearances. He was responsible for the annihilation of Lulusia, erasing an entire kingdom from the map in an instant. He wields ancient artifacts or abilities capable of unleashing destruction on a national scale. He has also shown strange abilities like controlling the 5 elders and transforming them into some kind of strange creatures, something like demonic creatures that serve to fight on his behalf. Apart from the already famous Domi Reversi, which seems to turn anyone into a demonic entity under Emu's control. Emu has at his disposal both the military power of the world government and his own almost divine or infernal powers. An enemy with such an arsenal naturally aims to be the final challenge for Luffy. With reasons like this, it's no wonder that approximately 70% or more of the community thinks that Emu will be the final villain of One Piece. It's, let's say, the obvious. All the recent focus of the story points towards him. Oda has hinted at it with these details, and it seems the logical conclusion: Emu is the supreme leader behind the oppression of the world government. Then Luffy will have to defeat him to free the world. And that's it. Case closed, right? Well, what if I told you that all this we just summarized might be nothing more than part of Eiichiro Oda's master plan? What if Emu is actually a smokescreen meant to mislead the fans? Eiichiro Oda, within the classic nature of such a long manga, always tries to surprise the viewer. He has mentioned on more than one occasion that he does not like it when fan theories correctly predict the twists he has planned. In fact, he said that if they guessed what it was, for example the One Piece, he would completely change what it is. Oda is famous for planting false clues and making shocking revelations that no one saw coming. In the case of the final battle, Oda knows that the expectations are enormous, after more than 25 years of history and over 1,000 chapters. He himself has spoken about the speculated final war in the work, confirming that it will happen, and he literally said some time ago, Marineford will look like a cute war next to what's coming. That is to say, the Marineford War, which until now has been the most brutal conflict shown with the death of Ace and Whitebeard, will seem very small compared to the climax of One Piece. With those statements, Oda guarantees us a colossal ending. Now then, if Emu were simply the final villain, just as we all believe, wouldn't it be too obvious for Oda's standards? Let's think, One Piece has over 1,000 chapters and more than 25 years of publication. Is the final boss really going to be someone Oda introduced to us in chapter 906 and that many fans assumed from that moment? It would be very strange if in such a long-running story, the final villain could be predicted so far in advance without any twist, right? Oda enjoys subverting our expectations. If he already confirmed that there will be a great final war and is making us think that Emu is the ultimate rival, one starts to suspect, would he really let us see the final villain coming in such an obvious way? If most already take it for granted, maybe Oda is preparing a surprise. As a creator, Oda would want the final battle to take us by surprise, to blow our minds with an incredible plot twist instead of just giving us the expected. At this point, I must clarify that Emu is not going to be the final villain. At least this is the idea of this theory. In my opinion, Emu is going to turn out to be what I call an object character. That is, a character whose goal is to fulfill a specific function to enhance another or demonstrate something in the story. And rather than being the climax himself, Emu would be a perfect decoy for the fans, presenting himself as the supposed final villain, which will actually give way to the true ultimate enemy of One Piece. And who is that ultimate enemy if it's not Emu? Well, hold on, because it might surprise you. There is no one above Emu or some extraterrestrial god pulled out of nowhere, but rather a character you all know very well for a long time. In fact, it is someone who has been competing with Luffy since before entering the New World, and the final villain will be Davy D. Teach Blackbeard. Yes, I know he is known as Marshall D. Teach Blackbeard, but since we have been told his real last name, I call him Davy D. Teach. It adds an aura. Maybe right now you're thinking this doesn't make sense, that Teach's role is different in the story, but I ask you to listen to everything I have to say because I'm sure that in the end, you'll see things differently. Oda is tricking us all with Emu while quietly preparing Blackbeard for the final strike. At this point in the story, Teach has been discreetly moved away from the main focus. Since the Marineford arc and the time skip, Blackbeard has been operating in the shadows. We don't see his moves in the foreground very often, just glimpses of his actions, his attack on Amazon Lily Island against Boa Hancock, his ambush of Trafalgar Law at sea, and little else. In the current Elbaf arc, the importance of Emu and the world government has been increasing, filling pages with revelations about the world's secrets. While Teach operates behind the scenes, we know he's out there causing trouble, but the manga doesn't highlight it too much. The perception as readers might be that Emu is now the great active villain, and that Teach might have another role or will be an intermediate obstacle. But beware, that perception is exactly what Oda wants us to have. He himself diverts our attention. While we are all amazed by Emu disintegrating islands and the intrigues of the government, Blackbeard has been amassing enormous power without us paying much attention. We know that the threat of Teach exists, but unconsciously we have put it on the back burner because of all the noise surrounding Imu and the elders of the Gorosei. This should already make us doubt, is what is happening really in the story, or is it what Oda wants us to think is happening? Because if one coldly analyzes the current situation of Marshal D. Teach, one will realize that he has everything to be the final villain. Let's review what Blackbeard currently possesses and what he has achieved. Hachinosu Island. Teach took over Hachinosu, the legendary pirate island that was the base of Rock's D. Zebeck decades ago. It is his territory and headquarters in the New World, a lawless place teeming with pirates. Additionally, Teach has expressed that he wants to turn Hachinosu into an officially recognized kingdom, his own pirate country, to be able to attend the Reverie, the World Meeting of Kings. In fact, he kidnapped Kobe precisely to negotiate with the world government for the recognition of Hachinosu as an affiliated nation in exchange for his life. This demonstrates his political ambition. Teach is not just a pirate seeking treasures, he wants to be a king in the world system, and surely something more that we do not know today. He also has a very powerful crew with very strong devil fruits. Blackbeard surrounded himself with the worst criminals from level 6 of Impel down, whom he recruited after their escape. His 10 Titanic captains, the fleet commanders. It includes monsters like Shiryu of the Rain, former jailer with the Suke no Mi of invisibility, Van Augur, sniper with the Wapu Wapu no Mi of teleportation, Lafitte, hypnosis, and possible fruit. Still to be revealed, Katarina Devon with the Inu Inu no Mi, model QB, capable of taking the form of others. This is important for later. Sanjuan Wolf, a colossal giant with the giant fruit. And he also has Pizarro, Vasco Shot, he has Doc Q with his disease fruit, etc. And several members have stolen powers from others. Shiryu obtained invisibility by taking Absalom's fruit, for example. Additionally, Teach has been gathering an arsenal of fruits and hunts powerful users to take their abilities. His crew has accumulated several strong fruits, and indeed, Blackbeard's crew is one of the most powerful ever seen, full of individuals with lethal powers. Then he also has 3 road pony glyphs in his possession. After the fall of Big Mom and Kaido, the 4 road pony glyphs, the red stones that point the way to Laughtale, were in play. Teach ambushed Trafalgar Law at sea and defeated him, stealing the rubbings of the road pony glyphs that Law had. Let's remember that Law had obtained copies of at least 3 of these stones, those from Wano, Zoo, and Whole Cake during the alliance against Kaido and Big Mom. This means that currently Blackbeard possesses 3 of the 4 road poneglyphs, which are necessary to go to Laughtale. He only lacks 1, the lost poneglyph, whose location no one knows for sure. Having the location of Laughtale almost within reach is a critical ingredient. It brings Teach closer to fulfilling the dream of becoming the king of the pirates before Luffy. He also has Charlotte Pudding captured. Teach attacked Big Mom's territory after Wano and kidnapped Charlotte Pudding, Big Mom's daughter, who belongs to the Three-Eye tribe. Big Mom mentioned that she believed Pudding, upon awakening the power of her third eye, could read the poneglyphs, a skill only possessed by the Kazuki clan in Wano and currently by Nico Robin. If Teach holds Pudding, it is likely for this reason, either to force her to read the road poneglyphs for him, or to extract memories with her Memo no Mai. This gives Teach an alternative method to decipher the path to Laughtale, even without Robin. He also has Monkey D. Garp as a hostage. In a bold move, Blackbeard managed to capture none other than the hero of the Navy, Monkey D. Garp, Luffy's grandfather. During the Battle of Hachinosu, Garp infiltrated to rescue Kobe and caused havoc. But finally, Teach's crew managed to capture Garp and currently have him imprisoned. This is a huge prize. Garp is a symbol of the Navy. Having him captive could serve Teach as a bargaining chip. It is speculated that Blackbeard might try to exchange Garp for something very valuable. For example, the official recognition of Hachinosu, or for world government technology. In any case, it is a move that personally hurts Luffy as well, since Garp is his beloved grandfather. He also has the location of 2 ancient weapons. Another subtle detail is that Teach could have very easy access to the location of at least 2 ancient weapons. How? Well, thanks to the mysterious Caribou. Caribou overheard conversations about Poseidon Shirahoshi on Fishman Island and about Pluton in Wano, and in recent chapters, he said he had to tell that information to a certain person. And although it is true that he has not revealed who that person is, it is implied that he is referring to Blackbeard, since he said he admired this person and asked Katarina Devon and Van Augur to take him to him because he had information to give him. If Caribou revealed those secrets to Teach's people, then Blackbeard knows that Shirahoshi is Poseidon, a weapon capable of controlling the Sea Kings, and that Pluton lies in Wano. Even without having them physically, that information is too powerful. And coincidentally, after Wano, we saw Teach attack key territories, like Hancock's Island, where there might be clues about Uranus, or we also saw him moving after the road poneglyphs. It is possible that he is gathering resources to also obtain the ancient weapons. He also possesses 2 devil fruits at the same time. This point is implied, but it remains very important. The only human known today capable of possessing 2 devil fruit powers at the same time. He stole the Yami Yami, the fruit of darkness, and the Gura Gura, the earthquake fruit that Whitebeard had. With darkness, he can nullify other abilities and absorb anything, and with earthquakes, he can destroy islands. Combined, they turn him into an unprecedented machine of destruction. We still do not know how it is possible for his body to tolerate the 2 fruits. Some suggest it is due to Teach's peculiar constitution, others that he has multiple souls, or perhaps because of the lineage of the Davy clan, but the fact is, he achieved something that theoretically should kill anyone. This makes him unique and extremely dangerous, and who knows if he plans to obtain a 3rd fruit. It has been speculated that he is looking for a mythical Zoan type like Kraken or something like that to complete his set of powers. In fact, that same Kraken theory has been on the channel for years, and now with the whole Davy Jones theme, it gains a lot of strength. Then he also has the face of Saturn, and this point is more subtle, but it could be critical. During the Egghead incident, 2 of Teach's commanders, Katarina Devon and Van Augur, infiltrated Egghead and ended up encountering Sanjay Garcia Saturn, one of the 5 elders who went there. Saturn, surprised, demanded to know what they were doing, as the crew was doing some rather strange things, and Katarina Devon and Van Augur responded that their goal was the world. Yes, they use those words, and you will understand later, but the most important thing is that Teach's pirates saw Saturno, and even Katarina Devon managed to touch him, and her 9-tailed fox fruit is capable of copying anyone's appearance. It is evident that Katarina Devon can now take on Saturno's appearance thanks to her ability. This could allow Teach's crew to impersonate an elder of the world government at some point, deceiving the government from within. And I know more than one of you will think that this character is dead and therefore has no further role, but precisely because they are dead, it can be more surprising, as let's remember that no one knows about this. No one in the world government knows that Katarina Devon has Saturn's face, so she could act at any moment, could appear as if he were alive, surprise everyone, and cause a few seconds of doubt that might allow for a very interesting victory for Teach, or even deceive people into thinking he is still alive. Seeing this brief review, it is clear that Teach has accumulated too many important things for Oda to leave him forgotten or in a secondary role. If we think about it coldly, he has everything to be the final villain of the work. Power, influence, information, personal motivations against Luffy. So why does he go relatively unnoticed in the recent narrative? Precisely because Oda wants to divert attention. He has kept us entertained with Immu, with the mysteries of the Void Century, with Shanks making moves, the threat of the government, and meanwhile Teach was making his move almost without the spotlight. In the recent arcs, since the revelation in Mary Jas, the importance of Immu has been rising, occupying the center of theories and discussions. Meanwhile, Teach has been moving in the shadows, doing incredible things, but not standing out too much on the pages. We know he's there, but we don't pay much attention to him. Everything is practically telling us, hey, look here, here's Immu, the villain in the shadows. And meanwhile, with the other hand, he hides Teach under the table, accumulating trump cards. With all the above, we already have enough reasons to at least doubt whether everything we see is real or just a carefully constructed illusion by the author. But there's more. Now let's go with the big clues that Oda has left. Very subtly, it must be said, but he has done it to prepare this twist. The biggest clue Oda has left us about this whole master plan is the recent flashback of God Valley, narrated during the Elbaf arc through the memories of Prince Lucky and Scopper Gaban. In this flashback, we were finally introduced to the legendary pirate Rox D. Zebeck, a mythical figure who had been mentioned before but never shown. Interestingly, the revelation of Rox as a character happened almost in parallel to that of Emu in the manga. Both were introduced around the same chapters, almost as if Oda was giving us two pieces of the puzzle at once to later connect them. The impressive thing is how it was presented to us. To Rox D. Zebeck, in literally the first panel where his face appears, the manga makes it very clear who the father of, in this case, Davy D. Teach, or as we knew him, Marshall D. Teach. Just like that, we are shown Rox with an unmistakable appearance, which is Teach's face, but with normal teeth, the same bulky physique, the same features, and at the bottom of the page, it directly states that Rox had a son named Marshall D. Teach, indicating that he is Blackbeard's father. The connection is immediate and too obvious, and this is very unusual. Normally, when Oda makes revelations about important family ties, like this character is the father of that one, he does it in a much more dramatic way through revealing dialogues or surprise revelations at critical moments or more naturally in the work, but here he does it almost casually. The first thing we learn about Rox is that he is Blackbeard's father. Why would Oda be in such a hurry to connect Zebeck with Teach? Why put it in the first panel? Clearly he wants to plant that idea in our heads right away. He leaves no room for theories or ambiguity. Blackbeard is Zebeck's son, period. This, of course, establishes a very powerful generational parallel. But let's continue with the flashback. We see that Rox D. Zebeck was an extremely ambitious pirate whose declared dream was to become the king of the world, above the king of the pirates. To achieve this, 44 years ago, he organized the strongest crew of the time, the Rox Pirates, and set out to challenge the world government. What did Zebeck do at his peak? Nothing more and nothing less than infiltrating Mary Jas, the holy city, and sneaking into the Chamber of Flowers where Emu resides. This is an incredible feat. Rox achieved something no one else had managed, reaching Emu in person all by himself. In that crucial scene, Rox stands before Emu in the room of the empty throne. And what happens? Rox had kidnapped some kings attending the reverie to use them as hostages, but Emu is unfazed by that. Emu appears before him in the shadows, and Zebeck quickly realizes that he can't defeat him at that moment. Why? Because he is very strong? No, for something very specific. He had a power of regeneration or immortality that made him untouchable. And indeed, if it had been purely about strength, one might think that Emu himself could have finished off Zebeck there, but he did not. In fact, he didn't even try. Since Emu's identity must be protected, and notice the level of fear Emu has of being revealed to the world, he ended Cobra's life immediately, only appearing before Cobra because he knew he was going to kill him. And then when he realized Sabo had seen him, he attacked without hesitation. So Rox, admitting he can't defeat him, throws a promise. I will return. I may not be able to defeat you right now, but one day I will return. Emu at that moment lets him go and ignores him, and Zebeck flees, knowing that it is not yet the time. This scene is deliberately set by Oda as a seed for the future. Rox basically vowed to return to defeat Emu at the right time, but we know that never happened in his era, because shortly after the God Valley incident took place, where Rox ultimately died or disappeared. And because of this, he was never able to fulfill that promise to return for Emu. Now, if the promise is still up in the air and Oda took the trouble to show it to us, how could it be fulfilled? Well, the answer is clear, through the person who inherited his will. And his genes, that is, through his son, Davy D. Teach, Blackbeard. And Blackbeard is literally the heir of Zebeck in blood and spirit, so he is the perfect candidate to return to that Chamber of Flowers and settle that unfinished business. Imagine the future scene, Teach arriving at Mary Jas, entering the Pangaea Palace where Emu is, perhaps sitting on the empty throne, and that would be a spectacular parallel that would close that 40-year circle. But there are more clues in this flashback. We know that Rox had a bold plan to rise to the top of the world. His goal was to defeat Emu and the world government and usurp their place. To achieve this, he sought powerful allies and resources. In particular, the flashback shows that Rox was obsessed with uniting the giants of Elbaf to his cause, as he considered that the strength of Elbaf was key to overthrowing the Holy Land. He repeatedly tried to recruit King Harold of Elbaf, even offering him all kinds of alliances. And here it is important that Rox mentions that to fulfill his plan, he needs the King of Elbaf at that time, who was Harold, to consume a certain fruit that was very powerful and which we imagine would be a legendary fruit. And indeed, Rox planned for the strongest giant of all, with the leadership of Elbaf, to eat a powerful fruit to use him as a weapon against Emu. We see that Rox ended up fighting against Harold when he allied with the government, as they offered Harold a deal to kill Zebeck. Rox got angry with Harold for allowing himself to be a puppet of the government and broke his friendship with him, but he refused to kill him because deep down he respected him too much. This shows how important the giants were in Zebeck's plan. The flashback continues 38 years ago. God Valley. Rox assaults the island to rescue his family, his wife Eris, and little Teach, who had been captured there for the Tenryubitos hunting game. We see Rox fighting against the Celestial Guards, the Knights of God, and against his own allies turned into demons by some government power. And amidst all the chaos that unfolds, we have to return for a moment to Harold and remember that just when he is with Harold, the true surname of Zebeck is revealed to us. It is revealed that his real name is Davy D. Zebeck, showing us a new clan and giving it incredible importance. From Zebeck himself, it is mentioned that he doesn't know much about his clan, but he does know that they are descendants of Davy Jones. By the way, let's remember that when he saw Emu, he told him that he was a big fan of Davy Jones, as if giving him a hint and let's say standing up to him. And he also mentioned something very interesting, and that is when he mentions that his wife and son are in God Valley, that he left them there. He told Teach a very important phrase and said, "Trust in the Davy clan." This obviously is there for a reason, but this whole flashback is not just there to tell us ancient history, it's there to make us understand Teach's motivations in the present. Zebeck was introduced now, so late in the series, because his legacy is extremely important for the end. Thanks to this retrospective, we know why Teach wants to rise to the top of the world, and where he got so many ideas, information, and that ambition. Zebeck's will, which was to overthrow the world or Emu, passed on to Teach even his knowledge. It is revealed that before the final battle, Rox told Harold his real name, his lineage, and his motivations. This implies that Teach, as a family member of Rox, perhaps knew the deepest secrets of his father and the Davy plan. It is worth noting that Teach named his flagship the Saber of Zebeck, in clear tribute to Zebeck, and took Hachinosu because it was his father's former domain. In other words, Teach is deliberately following in Zebeck's footsteps. Oda also showed us how Zebeck failed, and why Teach should not or cannot fail where his father did. Before parting, Rox told his family a very important phrase: "Trust in the Davy clan." That line is intriguing. What exactly did he mean? Perhaps the Davy clan, which we remember are apparently descendants of Davy Jones, has some special destiny or hidden ability, maybe the capacity to wield multiple devil fruits, which would explain Teach. Or it was simply a way of saying, trust in our family or our will. I don't know, but in any case, Oda gave that phrase a special connotation, highlighting it. We also know that the high-ranking government officials, the God Knights, and Emu had their eyes on the Davy clan as something important. As natural enemies, in fact, it is emphasized that the Tenryubito in God Valley were enraged to see before them a lineage they considered an ancient enemy and wanted to exterminate them immediately. This sounds very similar to what we already knew about the legacy of the D. That phrase from Rocinante, where he says that all the D are natural enemies of the gods, with the gods being the world nobles. All these pieces paint a very interesting picture, and teaches an enemy in capital letters of Emu, much more than Luffy is currently, despite prophecies, symbolism, Nika, Joy Boy, and all that. Personally, even in the manga, he has not yet crossed paths with Emu nor caused that direct hatred. Instead, Teach carries the inherited enmity from his father against Emu. Emu, who already defeated Joy Boy, Luffy's ideological predecessor in the past. It's true, but narratively Oda is positioning Teach as the one who has more substantial reasons to oppose Emu in the present. Now let's move from Emu's side to Luffy's side. Let's think, who fits better as Luffy's final enemy in terms of the story? On one hand, Emu represents the antithesis of Luffy's freedom. He is the hidden global tyrant, but Luffy's story since the East Blue has not been a direct struggle against the world government itself. That has been more the role of Dragon and the Revolutionaries. Luffy has mainly been a pirate facing other rival pirates in search of adventures in the One Piece. His dream is not to overthrow the government, it is to be free and be the king of the pirates. And who is Luffy's biggest rival in the pirate race? Blackbeard. Since Jaya, Teach has been Luffy's parallel nemesis. Both are bearers of the D. Both aspire to find the One Piece. Both believe in the dreams of pirates. Let's remember that phrase from Teach. Men's dreams never die. Teach is in many ways the dark reflection of Luffy. Where Luffy makes allies and trusts his enemies, Teach manipulates and betrays. He betrayed Blackbeard's crew, betrayed Whitebeard's crew, handed over Ace, etc. Where Luffy fights head on, Teach ambushes from behind. However, both share that relentless determination. Teach has caused enormous personal harm to Luffy. He already provoked Ace's capture and, consequently, his death. Now he has captured Garp, Luffy's beloved grandfather, and it is very possible that he will soon do something with Shanks. There are many solid theories that Teach might end up killing Shanks. Yes, Shanks, Luffy's mentor, inspiration, and friend. He has unfinished business with Blackbeard, as Shanks has the scar on his eye made by Teach and already warned that Teach was the real threat. Let's imagine that Teach manages to defeat or even kill Shanks. That would ignite a fierce emotional motivation in Luffy to confront him. Too many factors point to an inevitable clash. Monkey D. Luffy against Davy or Marshall D. Teach, the king of the pirates against who would be after defeating Emu, the king of the world. Because even though we have the world government as the cause of many evils in One Piece, after all, the story began as a series about pirates and it is likely to end as it started, being a story about pirates with a final confrontation between the two most powerful pirates of the era. One that would be Luffy, representing the inherited will of the ancient kingdom of Joy Boy, allied with all the oppressed peoples of the world. The other, Teach, wielding the dark power of the world government, having virtually crowned himself as the sovereign of the world after overthrowing Emu or using their weapons. It will be the cyclical repetition of the war from 800 years ago, which in that case was the D against Emu, but this time it is D against D, since Teach is also a D. All this for the fate of the world. Oda has already promised us a war so big that it will make Marineford look like child's play. We can foresee that this final war will have multiple fronts. The revolutionaries against the government, the Straw Hats, and their allies against the combined forces of Teach. It will be total chaos. Old enemies becoming Luffy's allies, betrayals, ancient weapons. In short, madness. And do you know the most curious thing of all? That all this downfall on Emu's part would be his own fault, because the only person who could warn Emu of what was coming was Saturn. Since if we remember in God Valley, when Rock sees Emu, he tells Whitebeard that what they have before their eyes is basically the world. The same words used by Katarina Devon and Van Augur to Saturn when they ask him what his goal is, saying it is the world. And at that moment, Saturn immediately attacked Katarina Devon and Van Augur. Perhaps that went a bit unnoticed, but seeing that Saturn is the person whom Emu possesses when they are in God Valley, it's because Saturn already heard those words from the person he knows is Teach's father, as he himself mentions having a special lineage. In other words, in summary, Saturn understood those words as if Rox was returning and knew that this time he was coming directly for Emu. But Emu, in an act of selfishness and lack of foresight, ended Saturno's life before he could explain everything he had seen and what was coming. In other words, he ended the life of the only person who could give him the information that he needed to prepare for what was coming. But in the midst of that whirlwind, Luffy and Teach were destined to face each other one last time. Both would have what the other desires. Perhaps Teach will manage to obtain the One Piece or part of its secret, proclaiming himself king of the world after having toppled Mary Jas. And Luffy would have the will of the world behind him, becoming the emblem of the new era. It would literally be the Battle of the Dawn. Each would have a special power, as Luffy by that time might be known as the King of the Pirates, and Teach at that moment is known as the King of the World, leading to the confrontation of the King of the World against the King of the Pirates, the man who controls the whole world with the man who wants to give freedom to the whole world. It would literally be the Battle of the Dawn. Why the dawn? Because in One Piece it has been repeated many times that the world will see a new dawn when oppression ends. The Minks, Odin, Pedro all spoke of that dawn of the world. Luffy, carrying the legacy of Joy Boy and Nika, is destined to bring the dawn. And what more literal image of that dawn than defeating Teach, whose power is absolute darkness. Teach's darkness against Luffy's son, Nika, the sun god. Drawing a small parallel with the fight between Blackbeard and Jace, in which in the last blow we saw, Teach mentions who will win, the sun or the darkness. This symbolism is too good to waste. Luffy is that rising sun and Teach is the shadow that eclipses it. Thus, One Piece would culminate as what it has always been, a pirate adventure, a story of pirates, with the ultimate battle between the future king of the pirates and his nemesis. In the process, of course, Luffy would have made many allies, and they would also fight, but the final obstacle would be a pirate, not a celestial king. It makes a lot of narrative sense. Oda can resolve the political plot and also give us an epic pirate duel to close the story with a flourish. Imagine that final scene after the victory. Luffy finally achieving the title of King of the Pirates, defeating Teach, freeing the world from an era of darkness, while a beautiful dawn appears on the horizon, the freed slaves, the oppressed people celebrating, Luffy's Nakamas laughing with tears. That's the ending all One Piece fans want to see, and Oda, master of storytelling, would present it to us after years of believing the final villain was someone else. An unforgettable surprise. In conclusion, Imu will not be the final villain, Blackbeard will be. Imu would have served as a catalyst for the Great War and as a false pinnacle, only for Teach to seize the opportunity, take control, and reveal himself as Luffy's true ultimate rival, ending Imu's life. Eiichiro Oda has set an elaborate trap for us, constructing an incredible smokescreen before our eyes with Imu and the entire world government plot, all while preparing the structure for a grand plot twist related to Blackbeard and Zebeck's legacy. All the breadcrumbs are there in the manga, dates, numbers, phrases, events, all waiting for us to connect them. And we are heading towards an epic finale where Monkey D. Luffy will illuminate the new dawn of the world, defeating David D. Teach, and finally ending the cycle of oppression that began 800 years ago. Get ready because the best of One Piece is yet to come, and many may not have seen it coming. The inherited will always find a way to be fulfilled, and the dream of the D will soon clash against the darkness of Blackbeard in a battle for the ages. The dawn awaits us after the darkest night, and let the battle continue, because the dreams of men never end. First thing I want to mention is that the basis of this theory is from chapter 1164 of the One Piece manga, a chapter in which many things happen. Ignoring the Domi Reversi to Zebeck, we need to focus on a conversation that Zebeck has with Imu, where they talk about Joy Boy, Davy Jones, they talk about the king of the world, about what happened a long time ago. And despite Oda continuing his habit of not wanting to reveal information to us 100%, it is true that he has given us certain clues and enough information to connect it with things from, as I said, more than 200 chapters ago, and start to trace a thread that will allow us to solve everything. The first thing I will talk about is the Davy clan. In this flashback, it has been revealed by Rox D. Zebeck that his name is not Rox D. Zebeck, but rather Davy D. Zebeck introducing a new surname, introducing a new clan as he calls it, and this changes things a lot since he says he is a descendant of Davy Jones, whose real name was Davy D. Jones, implying that they are obviously from the D clan from the Davy clan, and this also implies that Zebeck's son, who is Marshall D. Teach not be Marshall D. Teach, but rather Davy D. Teach, making this surname, continue to be passed down over the years, something that today we know is present with Teach being one of the leading figures in piracy worldwide, honoring what his father was in his time. Later in the video, we will discuss exactly who or what Davy D. Jones is. Let's talk about the real-world mythology that exists about him and review all the information we have about this character in One Piece. But as I said, we will do this later, because right now the only important thing is to remember and consider the topic of the Davy clan. Here I want to make a small parenthesis, and that is when this was revealed, I mentioned at the time that perhaps we should not rule out the possibility of the D in Monkey D. Luffy or Jaguar D. Saul, the very famous D, would mean Davy, and some might think this makes no sense, because why would it be called Davy D? Jones if the D means Davy. Well, this is something I mentioned at the time, and maybe I was called a bit crazy, but today it has gained a lot of traction. And what I personally understand is that over these 800 years that we know the Void Century and all the other things have passed, the information could have been misinterpreted or corrupted. And let's suppose that the word Davy was meant to be erased from history by the world government and they started calling it the D, but the same heirs of the Davy clan knew that the word Davy was something very important and that it came from Davy Jones. So perhaps with the manipulation of the information itself and the introduction of the letter D in many families, they interpreted that if they also came from that past, then maybe Davy Jones had a D, without thinking that Davy was the same D just hidden. And this is something I see Oda very capable of doing. It's not what I'm going to focus on in the theory, but I do think it's important to mention it because what better way to hide the D than by putting it right in front of us? I mean, the logical part tells you it's not Davy, because obviously why would it have that D? And this would be a very good idea from Oda to say, hey, I told you, but you didn't want to see it, and obviously you weren't going to think about it because I was practically discarding it for you. When if you think about it with a bit of quote-unquote logic, it could be that this information over 800 years has been corrupted, moved, and distorted, so that in this way the letter D becomes, well, Davy. As I said, I don't want to get too deep into this because it's not that relevant to the theory, but I do think it's important to mention it, and we're going to talk about the Davy clan. When we talk about the Davy clan as of today, we only know of 3 banners that were very important and still are today. The first is Davy D. Jones, who, as I said, we'll discuss all the information later, but we know he is a very important pirate in the history of the One Piece world. Then we have Davy D. Zebeck, who was another very important pirate, and here we see his end in God Valley, possessed by Emu, and also trying to create a kind of void around him, erasing his name from history. And we have Davy D. Teach, who is the last standard bearer of this surname, of this clan, and who we assume will reach the end of One Piece and will have some kind of fight against Emu or some kind of war, or will unleash something. You know my theory, I believe that Emu will perish at the hands of Teach, and that it will be Teach, finally, the Davy who fulfills this dream that has been talked about a lot. And I think it's important to mention it here. We have to go to the moment when Rox appears in front of Emu in the flower chamber and tells him that he is a big fan of Davy Jones and says he will return to finish him off. He sends him a message, he sends him a threat, he tells him he will return and accompanies it with the mention of Davy Jones, which at first might seem like something just put there for the sake of it, and later we see it gains much importance because Zebeck reveals that he is a descendant of Davy Jones himself. And as I say, once we reach this point, we might assume there's nothing more, nothing important, but it seems to me that we're overlooking something, and it's when Emu appears in front of Zebeck in God Valley, he tells him that he will defeat him, and that a promise must be fulfilled. We see how he introduces the terms promise and fulfilled. This is something we have seen for a long time in One Piece. Let's remember, for example, Joy Boy's promise to the first Fishman princess, which he couldn't fulfill and ended up in the apology letter on the poneglyph we also found on Fishman Island. And then later, when Emu applies the Domi Reversi on Zebeck, we see how Emu says to end this right now, to end Davy's dream. And this, which at first seemed like just random words, becomes very important because Emu uses it to his advantage and performs the Domi Reversi with the sole objective of ending the bloodline of the Davy family, ending his wife Eris, and ending his son Teach, since the others had suffered the effect of the Domi Reversi and had already been taken out of the way by Rox. Then, Emu himself, who knows about Davy Jones, makes us understand that Davy's dream is something that goes beyond. It's like a kind of will. It's something important, and we are going to see that perhaps this has been in the work for a very long time, maybe 15 years, and we have to go back to the island of Jaya where we find Marshal D. Teach for the first time. We meet this character who has some words, who has a speech that made a big impact, and he says that people's dreams never die. At first we might think he was referring to a dream he had, a dream he might have inherited from someone close, but it seems not. And this dream that Davy D. Teach talks about, the descendant of Davy D., Zebeck and descendant of Davy D. Jones, it is Davy's dream, and that dream, that will, has been passed down from generation to generation, until now this person, Marshal D. Teach, Davy D. Teach, has it and knows he wants to fulfill it, that he is going to fulfill it. Let's also remember that when the name was revealed in the conversation between Rox and Harold, Zebeck revealed that he told his son to trust the Davy clan, which were very important words, because obviously if he tells him to trust the Davy clan, and now they talk about Davy's dream, and we take into account Zebeck's own words when he encountered Emu in the flower chamber, where he told him he would finish him, then there is a dream to fulfill. And what is that dream? Well, now we can go to this. As I said, we are still in chapter 1164, and we see that Emu starts applying the Domi Reversi to Zebeck, and while Zebeck resists the effect of the Domi Reversi as much as he can, we see that they have a brief conversation, and Zebeck says to Emu right to his face, Davy D. Jones, that is the name of the ancient king of the world. Very important this, because he is using the term king of the world. Really, it is important. To which Emu responds, "Shut up, that guy was never a king, not even for a moment. You know nothing about the grudge between Davy and Mu." To which Zebeck responds that he shouldn't be intimidated by a simple name like Davy. And he continues saying, "You were always afraid, right? Afraid that Davy's will would be inherited and that one day he would come to fulfill his promise, returning to the promise he made to him in the Chamber of Flowers, that he would end him." And to finish, he says, "Which of the two scares you more, Davy Jones or Joy Boy?" First of all, the most important thing here is that it confirms they are two different people, but then Emu continues speaking and says, "Stop dreaming, those guys will never appear again, if only you would disappear." And this is truly crazy, because even though it seems like it doesn't go further and doesn't address anything important, it has given us enough information to trace different things and different patterns that are very interesting. The first thing, as I say, is the matter of Davy Jones's promise and dream, which I think is quite easy to know. I think it's quite intuitive, and I think Oda has made it quite clear to us. And that is, Davy Jones's dream is to overthrow the king of the world and place himself as the king of the world. And I think this is quite easy to understand. Everything we saw in the flashback of Rox and Zebeck was aimed at this. He said he needed 2 fruits. He said he had a plan that was very well laid out for this. He even threatened Emu in the Chamber of Flowers. Even when he faced him in God Valley, he told him he was going to finish him, and also said that a promise had to be fulfilled. I think this is quite simply reflected in the manga, and I think it's something that at first you might not think about, but when you analyze it a bit, you say, hey, I think they've served it to me on a silver platter. I think it's quite easy to understand. So while the first thing is that we are already clear that the promise, the objective, the will that Davy Jones has is to overthrow the king of the world and make himself the king of the world, well, again. And I say again because Zebeck confirms that Davy Jones was the former king of the world. But we will get to this now. The important thing about all this is that we already know at least the goal, aim, or dream of Teach. We know that he is preparing something, and we know that he is going directly after Emu. This character, who perhaps has gone a bit unnoticed, I have already mentioned in the latest videos that despite Oda wanting to make us see that he is a bit missing and not in the main spotlight, is a character that truly should be greatly feared. The first thing is that he is a character with a huge army of people with devil fruits. He has a very powerful crew. As of today, he possesses the location of 3 road poneglyphs that he stole from Trafalgar Law. He has kidnapped the marine hero, Garp. He has Pudding, who might be able to read the road poneglyphs. And also, and not less important, he possesses the memory fruit, which at first seems like it won't be very useful, but in my opinion, it could be used to extract Garp's memories and see exactly what we are seeing in this flashback, to understand who Emu is, what Emu is, see his father, hear his father's last words, and have all the information he lacks if he is missing anything. Then it also has Saturn's face, which some might think is not very useful since Saturn is dead, but I think it's even more serious because most people don't know that Saturn is dead. This hasn't been revealed to the world. We haven't seen it in the news. It's something that happened relatively recently. So having Saturn's face to infiltrate Mary Jas or something like that could be a huge problem. And going back to Garp, let's remember that his goal was to make Hachinosu a country to be able to go to the Reverie. And obviously he wants to go to the Reverie to do something dangerous. What? Well, to go after Emu. And if all this were not enough, he will also have the location of 2 ancient weapons. And you might think, why is that? Well, let's remember that Katarina Devon and Van Augur took Caribou to Teach. And Caribou knows the locations of Shirahoshi, Poseidon on Fishman Island, and of Pluton in the land of Wano as well. Therefore, even though Oda has taken Teach off the screen and out of the main focus, it is something very important to keep in mind, and I think he will be a worthy successor to both Davy Jones and Davy and Zebeck. But now that we more or less have the promise of Davy Jones and more or less have all this clear, let's go to the information given to us, and they tell us that Davy Jones is the former king of the world. But let's look again at Imu's reaction to these words. And Imu says, "Shut up. That guy was never a king. Not for a moment. You know nothing about the grudge that exists between Davy and Mu. This is important to me because I think it reveals several things. The first thing is that the original king of the world, the first one, was Davy Jones. He was the first. And then Imu somehow took that throne and became the king of the world. But the important thing is the words he mentions, and he says that he knows nothing about the grudge that exists between Davy and Mu. Here, I must say that the only doubt I have is whether he is referring to the Davy clan and the Mu clan, which is something I made up. The Mu clan, it hasn't been revealed. But considering that the Davy clan exists, perhaps he is not speaking about himself and is referring to the family, the Mu clan, and that they are two clans that have been in conflict for a long time, which is why he uses the word resentment between them. But if not, the simplest option is that there is resentment between Davy Jones and Imu. But why the word resentment? Why does he get indignant when he is told he was the king and Imu tells him that he was never a king, that Davy Jones was never a king, not even for a moment? What I take from this, in my opinion, is something very simple. And it makes me understand that, as I say, Davy Jones was the king of the world. He was the king. He was the person who ruled. But Imu, I understand, was perhaps a friend of Davy Jones. And at some point, this person, Davy Jones, did something that Imu didn't like. Did something that made him not consider him as king. And we will discuss this more later because there is truly a biblical story that could be somewhat related to this. And then I will let you speculate as you wish. But what I think is that when Davy Jones did something he didn't like, Imu somehow accumulated hatred and betrayed him, overthrew him from his position, and made himself king of the world because perhaps he was doing things that he didn't agree with. Maybe Davy Jones wasn't as bad as we think. Maybe he took being the king of the world a bit as a joke, a bit as a game or something like that. And maybe Imu thought that wasn't kingly, that perhaps the figure he worshipped, which was Davy Jones, wasn't as godlike, so to speak, and decided to take the position himself and show that he could be the king of the world. And this is what he has been trying to avoid for so long, that the promise of Davy Jones, that surely his last words would be the same as Zebeck told him in the Chamber of Flowers, that he would return, that he would finish him, and that he couldn't stop him. Perhaps also speaking of the inherited will and instilling this fear in Imu, because we see that when he is mentioned, he becomes extremely nervous and then says that those two, both Davy Jones and Joy Boy, will not reappear. So with the word resentment introduced and Imu's reaction, the feeling I get is that somehow he betrayed the king of the world at the time and overthrew him. It's not that they were enemies from the beginning, but there is resentment because perhaps Imu felt betrayed and that's why he betrayed him. Let me explain. Perhaps Davy Jones did not take any physical action to betray Imu, but by doing certain actions that he did not consider kingly, that's why he denies that Davy Jones was the king. Imu decided to betray him, and somehow in his mind, he believed it was right because he was not a good king, because he did not act well, and he considered it a betrayal both to Imu himself and to the position of king of the world. And as a result of all this, as I say, Imu was put in place, and everything that followed came. At this point, it might seem like we have already discussed everything important, but no, we have much left. And it also mentions Joy Boy, which is important because it confirms both that Davy Jones and Joy Boy were two different people, and that, well, Joy Boy was not the king of the world. Some might say, hey, why wasn't Joy Boy the king of the world? Why do you say it with such certainty? Well, this is simple, and we have to go to the Egghead arc, where we saw Emmeth appear, who was a friend of Joy Boy, likely a crew member, and Emmeth did something many times during the arc, which was to apologize. He apologized to Joy Boy. Do you remember why he was apologizing? He apologized because he couldn't make him king, and here you might think that perhaps he was referring to not being king of the pirates, but no, he was referring to not being able to make him king of the world. Why do I say this? Because if we go to chapter 967 of the manga, where Roger finds the One Piece and becomes the king of the pirates, we see that this title is something Roger seems to obtain for the first time. It wasn't something that was up in the air like today, where we know that many people want to be the king of the pirates, but rather it was a kind of title that Roger somehow created. and I read the people's dialogues to you as they are. We see that a bunch of newspapers are falling where they say that Roger has obtained the One Piece, and we see that people say, Roger's pirates have done it. They have circled the world like no one has done before. Finally, we have the champion of the seas. He is the king of the sea. He is the king of the pirates. And then we have Roger's own reaction upon learning that he has been given that title. And we see Rayleigh, who is reading the newspaper in front of Roger, reading what it says, and he says, fame, wealth, power, the man who achieved it all, the king of the pirates, Gold Roger. And Roger says, it's Gold D. Roger, but that Pirate King thing doesn't sound bad at all. And then Roger's crew says that now they understand everything. They understand why the world government hides his name. But as we see, Roger says that the Pirate King thing doesn't sound bad, as if implying that it's a title he hadn't heard before, but it was given to him, as if saying, hey, well look, the Pirate King thing doesn't sound bad. Roger's reaction indicates that it is not a title that already existed and that he wanted to achieve, like saying, look, I am finally the king of the pirates, but rather it is a title that has been attributed to him. In fact, if we look throughout One Piece, when they talk about the Pirate King, they always relate it to Roger. They say, I want to be the king of the pirates like Roger, but they can't give you another example. That is to say, it is a title that was created with Roger, so in the Void Century, the title of King of the Pirates probably did not exist, or at least not in this way. Therefore, probably in the Void Century, this title did not properly exist, as I say, as a title, the title King of the Pirates. So, if the Pirate King didn't exist, the only king there was, as confirmed by chapter 1164, was the king of the world. So if Emmeth apologized because he couldn't make Joy Boy the king, it was precisely the king of the world, implying that they lost the war as we saw in the mural and couldn't make him king of the world. And this war, which many of us would think was perhaps against Davy Jones, seems not to be the case, that this war was against Immu. So the order of events would be something like Davy Jones was the king of the world, Immu took that position, and then Joy Boy went to try to take this position as well, and finally they lost. Here it is important because perhaps it could now surprise us and outline a slightly different story, with something that I will later explain by talking about Davy Jones. The things we have seen of him in One Piece, real-world mythology, and other things. We might suppose in some way that Joy Boy and Davy Jones were perhaps friends, or got along well, or maybe did not get along badly at all. To think that Davy Jones was the king of the world, was betrayed and overthrown by Immu, and Joy Boy, upon learning of this and seeing that this person, Davy Jones, was no longer in charge and that a much worse person had taken over, went to try to avenge Davy Jones, faced Immu and lost by running, things we still don't know 100%. But then Immu, after Zebeck's words, saying which of the two scares him more, if David Y. Jones or Joy Boy adds to stop dreaming that those guys will never appear again, and he leaves it hanging. This is very, very, very important because if we go to chapter 908 of the One Piece manga, right in the chapter where Immu appears in front of the 5 elders, we have a scene that is very important, and we see in the flower garden that Immu has some photos that are cut up and stabbed. And whose photos are these? The first is Shirahoshi's, which is pierced, and this is important because we saw that while Roger was leaving Fishman Island, the Sea Kings were talking and saying that finally the two kings would meet again, that it would take 10 years to be born and 15 to grow enough, referring to Shirahoshi. Also because they themselves define him as their king, and then we saw that Shirahoshi, being Poseidon, has the ability to control them. She is their queen, so to speak. This is the first thing, and obviously she is an extremely important figure for the Void Century, for the history and future of One Piece, and for Immu. And then there are 2 photos which are of Luffy and Teach. Initially, it was thought that since they were 2 very important people of the DClan, Immu had the photos there, but going back to chapter 1, 1164, it is implied that this is not the case, and it is that Zebeck somehow instills fear in Immu that those 2 will appear, and here they have the wills of both Joy Boy and Davy Jones. Also, Teach has a very, very similar appearance to Rocks. Imagine Immu's face when he realized that this person with the D, who had Zebeck's face, was active again and knew he was coming back for him, that the will he thought was destroyed was not. Since remember that in this chapter 1164, Immu thinks that both Teach and Eris have died, but Kuma saved them. So with all this, we can have many things very clear. First of all the clues that Oda has left us, and all the indications of Immu's concern with the photos. Then the theme of dreams, the promise, and everything related to Davy Jones and his inherited will, which today resides in Teach. Then also that Joy Boy could not become king, but it did not refer to King of the Pirates because that title did not exist, but rather King of the World, which at the time also was Davy Jones, and that probably with the word resentment in the middle was that Emu probably knew Davy Jones and perhaps was part of his crew, which I would really like, because if we look, Zebeck's crew already betrayed him. Maybe Teach's crew will also bring a betrayal, and maybe that's a bit of the Davy family curse, that they will always have someone by their side who betrays them. They will always have an Emu by their side. But there is still much to discuss, because we are going to explain and comment on who Davy Jones is in the world of One Piece and who he is in the real world. And I am going to explain to you all the mythology of Davy Jones. I am going to tell you a story of biblical references that also refers to what Davy Jones later became and the origin of the name Davy Jones. And then you will see how all this relates very easily to One Piece, and I will even leave it to you so that you can make the connection. And it is quite clear that the canonical information we have about Davy Jones in One Piece is very little. That's why I will do my best to build mountains with the little bits of data we have. But as of today, with what we have, it is impossible to put together a complete story. So actually, the only reason it's even possible to discuss Davy Jones is because Davy Jones is a real-life pirate legend. That is, we can draw information from real life, since from the series, well, at the moment we don't have much. And I'm sure that most people who have seen One Piece have also seen Pirates of the Caribbean, and vice versa. I, for example, have not seen Pirates of the Caribbean, but I had to research to make this video. I should watch them? Let me know in the comments. As I was saying, Davy Jones is a very well-known name in popular culture, and it is logical to assume that although there will obviously be some differences, much of Davy Jones's story in One Piece will be based on existing mythology, just as Oda has done with other legendary characters. Exactly like the character of Loki, the giant prince, because if we look at him and compare him with the Loki from Norse mythology, at first glance, they are very different, but in the fundamental and most important aspects, they are essentially the same, while being, as I said, quite different at the same time. Anyway, I might be going on a bit, but I want us to think of Davy Jones with that mindset. This is how Oda usually works. The better you understand the legend that inspires a character, the better you will understand the character itself. So let's start directly with the story of Davy Jones in mythology. And it is much simpler than one might think, because unlike many characters from various mythologies that Oda has adapted in One Piece, Davy Jones himself does not have a very concrete story. Historically, Davy Jones is basically just a name associated with pirate life. In fact, when talking about Davy Jones, it almost always refers to Davy Jones's locker, which is a nautical euphemism for death at sea. In pirate tradition, Davy Jones is often depicted as a kind of ruler of the pirates' underworld. In many representations, he is literally portrayed as the demon of the sea. So if we base ourselves only on that, it seems we don't know much about Davy Jones, and the theory would have to end here. But actually, no, because there are two additional resources we can use to reconstruct the story of this character. The first would be the legend and mythology of Davy Jones, which has always intrigued people for a long time. It is natural that there are academic theories about what his real origin might be. Even if we do not know the exact truth, these theories are relevant to the discussion we are having. And the second thing is that sometimes the historical truth behind an inspiration for One Piece is not the most important thing. That's how myths and legends are. Perhaps there was some real event that originated them, but over time, they become stories told in different ways, with many creative liberties. That's why the character of Davy Jones in One Piece could very well end up having much in common with the popular fictional version of Davy Jones. For example, as I say, the one from Pirates of the Caribbean, besides the little we know in the manga, Oda is not exactly a purist of mythology. And I hate to break illusions, but in the original legends, Davy Jones was not a giant squid, nor did he sail on the Flying Dutchman. In fact, the Flying Dutchman was another separate pirate legend that Disney decided to mix with Davy Jones. And it certainly worked for them. Legends and myths tend to be that malleable. Well, here's a brief summary of the story of Davy Jones according to Disney in Pirates of the Caribbean. Originally, Davy Jones was simply a man, a pirate, and a sailor. The exact circumstances vary in the stories, but essentially Davy Jones fell in love with a beautiful and fickle sea goddess named Calypso. As proof of his love, he agreed to fulfill a task that the goddess assigned him, to guide the souls of those who perished at sea to their eternal rest. The idea is that Davy Jones could only return to reunite with Calypso on her island once every 10 years. He accepted that deal out of love, but he was deceived and betrayed. When he returned to the island after 10 years hoping to find her, Calypso was not there. It's curious because many think of Davy Jones as the devil of the sea, but in Pirates of the Caribbean, the real devil is Calypso. Davy made a deal with Calypso, who would be the equivalent of the devil in that story. And he did not get what he wanted. On the contrary, he was condemned to a rather horrible fate, doing something for all eternity that he really did not want to do. Due to this betrayal, Davy Jones summoned the First Pirate Brethren Court, a great alliance of pirates, and conspired with them to take control of the seas from the goddess Calypso. Ultimately, the Brotherhood managed to imprison Calypso by trapping her essence within the body of a mortal woman. Despite achieving revenge this way, Davy was still devastated by the love he had for her, so much so that due to the pain he felt, he tore out his heart with his own hands and locked it away in the famous dead man's chest. In practice, you can see it as Davy Jones removing his own soul. After that, he became an evil being, renounced his sacred duty of guiding souls in the afterlife, and instead began recruiting those who did not want to die into his crew, basically enslaving fearful sailors. Davy Jones took advantage of the fear of people who are afraid to die without achieving their goals, becoming something like a literal demon of the sea. Over time, the entire conflict of Pirates of the Caribbean revolves around the heart of Davy Jones. Whoever controls his heart controls the man, and this is where the story gains interesting depth. Look, Davy Jones was part of the pirate council that initially joined forces to defeat the sea goddess, because they saw her as the devil to conquer. But then Davy Jones became the devil, so the Pirate Brotherhood had to gather again and decided to release Calypso to help them fight against Davy Jones, now turned into a monster, and also against the Navy. There is something cyclical in all this that fits well with the world of One Piece. Essentially, whoever holds the power ends up becoming the devil of the story. First, the sea goddess Calypso was the villain, then it was Davy Jones, then it was the trading company, which was the Navy when it obtained Davy Jones's power, and then the pirates again when they released Calypso, making deals with the devil and ultimately becoming the devil themselves in each cycle. In other words, the devil keeps changing faces, but at each stage of the adventure, the Sea Warriors are fighting against some incarnation of evil. In the end, while everyone was fighting each other, pirates against pirates, pirates against the Navy, deep down, they were all fighting for the same thing, only each side had its own vision of what the true evil to defeat was. Summarizing the story of Davy Jones in Pirates of the Caribbean. Davy Jones had a love story. Davy Jones was betrayed. Davy Jones lost his soul by removing his heart. Davy Jones became a demon, and the way to free him from his curse in the end was to kill him. Davy Jones had to die to be free. Now then, we will later revisit some details of Pirates of the Caribbean that I haven't mentioned yet, because I believe Davy Jones's story in One Piece will share many of these key elements. But let's move on to what we know within the world of One Piece itself. The only real information we have been given about Davy Jones in the manga is told to us by Nico Robin during the Foxy Saga. Robin mentions that Davy Jones was a pirate from a very, very long time ago and that he was cursed by a demon. And honestly, just with that, it already sounds quite close to everything we just reviewed. But as I mentioned before, even though there isn't a real historical tale of Davy Jones in our world, there are investigations and theories about the origin of the name Davy Jones. It may not be the definitive truth, but it's the closest we can get to a historical basis for this legend. And it's relevant to discuss it. Specifically, I want to talk to you about the theory that the name Davy Jones actually comes from the biblical story of the prophet Jonah. And I'll say it right now, those who are into theories know that Oda has been greatly inspired by the Bible, so this already makes some sense, doesn't it? I will not go into all the details of the story of Jonah because not all are relevant. I prefer to give a summary of who Jonah was and why he is related to Davy Jones. The most characteristic thing about Jonah is that at first he refused to obey a direct order from God. In essence, Jonah fled from what God had commanded him to do. There are different interpretations of why he did it, but we can assume that Jonah was afraid to fulfill that divine mandate. The fact is that God had ordered Jonah to do something very specific, to go preach to a city full of wickedness to offer them salvation. And Jonah didn't like that idea one bit. He thought those wicked people didn't deserve to be saved. In fact, later in the story, when God actually forgives that city, Jonah gets very angry. Jonah did not want to save the wicked. Returning to the part where Jonah flees, Jonah boarded a ship to escape the assigned mission, and then God unleashed a great storm at sea to prevent him from fleeing. The sailors on the ship panicked, and Jonah, knowing he was the cause of the disaster, confessed to them that the storm was his fault for disobeying God. He even told them to throw him into the sea to calm the storm and save their lives. This shows that Jonah was willing to face the consequences of his actions. He himself offered as a sacrifice to appease divine wrath. Although more than genuine repentance, it seemed basically a kind of resignation. Basically, Jonah preferred to die rather than fulfill the order of God that he so detested. Then, in the midst of this furious storm, the sailors finally threw Jonah into the sea, but God had no intention of Jonah dying there. Instead, he sent a great fish, traditionally interpreted as a whale, which swallowed Jonah whole. Jonah remained alive inside the whale for 3 days and 3 nights. That time inside the belly of the cetacean was a kind of personal purgatory for Jonah. It served for him to reflect and pray, to think about what had happened and why he was wrong to disobey. A bit of sailor context. In the nautical culture of the past, it was considered that having a Jonah on board brought bad luck. Imagine the sailors are at sea and suddenly a terrible storm breaks out. They would look at each other searching for the jinx. Who is the Jonah on this ship? Who do we have to throw overboard? That is to say, Jonah became synonymous with a person who brings bad luck at sea. And all this fits quite well with the similarity between the name Jonas and Jones. It is believed that the term Davy Jones might have originated as a deformation or evolution of Jonas. On the other hand, Davy sounds similar to devil in some old sailor languages, so some think that Davy was a nickname given to certain spirits or entities, like saying the Devil Jones, which is where Davy Jones would come from. In the end, that's how language evolves. Someone says something to another, others like how it sounds, everyone starts repeating it, and in the end, no one remembers exactly where it came from. The other concrete part of the legend of Davy Jones is his famous locker, Davy Jones's locker. In sailor jargon, as we said, it's a euphemism for death at sea, but it doesn't refer to death itself, rather to a sort of final resting place beneath the waves. Notice that Davy Jones's locker is never exactly described as hell or the afterlife. It's more like a kind of purgatory, an intermediate place between life and death for those who die at sea. In Pirates of the Caribbean, in fact, Davy Jones's job was to guide souls to the afterlife. But first, those souls passed through Davy Jones's locker, a marine limbo before their final destination. This makes a perfect parallel with Jonah inside the whale. Jonah was in a state where he was neither dead nor alive, suspended in the darkness of the fish's belly. But why am I telling you all this? Well, because I believe that Jonah's story could be exactly the inspiration for Oda for the character of Davy Jones in One Piece, both his personality and certain key events in his life. Broadly speaking, Jonah was someone with a strong sense of morality, who nevertheless was filled with hatred towards the wicked. He wanted the wicked to suffer and be condemned, and it was very difficult for him to learn compassion. Jonah saw himself as a righteous man who wanted to save the innocent, but at the same time, he wished to punish the wicked mercilessly. Now, why am I so sure that Davy Jones in One Piece will be based on Jonah? Well, because knowing Jonah's story, we already have in One Piece a character whose story fits too well into that mold. That character is Rox D. Zebeck. For now, the information we have portrays Rox D. Zebeck as surprisingly a guy with good intentions at heart. We know that Rox wanted to dethrone the celestial dragons and become the king of the world, but we still don't have the full story of his motives. Even so, with what we already saw in the God Valley flashback, it's very clear that his crusade implied that the world government was evil, practically the enemy of humanity in his view. Just like Jonah, who saw the sinful city as something that had to be destroyed. There is a very revealing detail in God Valley, and it is that when Rox meets the king of Elbaf, who is in the holy land of Mary Jas, Rox's face shows surprise and annoyance, and he says something like, "A giant? The Holy Land? Is this guy lost, or what?" Rox knows that the celestial dragons enslaved giants, and seeing that giant there clearly makes him curious. This suggests that Rox had a sense of justice or compassion towards those who suffered under the celestial dragons. I might be reading too much into it, but take a look. Prince Loki of Elbaf idolizes Rox D. Zebeck, and during the attack on Elbaf, when Loki faces the Holy Knights, he says to them, "I would never join scum like you." Considering that Loki himself has said his goal is to destroy the world, and yet he considers the celestial dragons much worse than him, I imagine that Loki, as a fanatic disciple of Rox, is repeating something Rox used to say. Loki hates the celestial dragons because Rox instilled that in him indirectly, and I think it's very significant that Loki worshipped Rox because the narrator in the manga reveals to us that Rox D. Zebeck worshipped Davy Jones. Do you see? Loki idolizes Rox. Rox idolized Davy Jones. Davy Jones, according to real-world historians, is based on Jonah. Everything fits in layers. Rox wants to save the world by overthrowing the evil gods, the celestial dragons, but he also wants those evil ones to suffer their deserved fate, just like Jonah, who wanted to save the innocent but for the wicked to burn in hell. Rocks, like Jonah, rebelled against the god of his time. In this case, he rebelled against Immu, the divine figure of the world government. Jonah fled from God and embarked with some unknown sailors. Rocks fled to the seas and formed a crew full of powerful pirates who were not very loyal to him. When Jonah unleashed divine wrath, his sailors threw him overboard. The incident at God Valley and the arrival of Rocks were caused by a betrayal from his own crew. In short, Rocks D. Zebeck is practically the Jonah of One Piece. And this would imply that Davy Jones, whom Rocks revered, is also, in essence, a Jonah within the story of One Piece. Until now, we have associated Davy Jones with Jonah on the side of the legend and with Rocks D. Zebeck due to Rocks' idolatry towards him. So I think we already have a solid basis for speculation. It seems very likely to me that the character of Davy Jones in One Piece has a personality and background inspired by Jonah, and that his story follows some of the patterns of Jonah's story, mixed with those of the Davy Jones story from Pirates of the Caribbean that we summarized earlier. But before going completely crazy, there is one last piece of the puzzle we have to mention: the Davy Back fights. We already know that Davy Jones is somehow related to that strange pirate game introduced in the Foxy Saga, because it cannot be a coincidence that Rocks D. Zebeck, a worshipper of Davy Jones, formed his crew through Davy Back fights. The narrator told us that Rocks recruited members from other crews using that game. And what is the premise of a Davy Back fight? Steal rival crew members and force them to join yours. It's a game of subjugation, basically. The winning captain takes the nakama from the loser. That sounds very similar to something we've already seen Immu can do, doesn't it? Think about how Immu can literally erase entire islands from the map or subjugate people at will as if they were pieces in a game. This theme of subjugating and taking what you want is present both in Immu's powers and in the Davy Back fight. It cannot be a coincidence. Now let's connect the dots. In Pirates of the Caribbean, Davy Jones didn't start as the devil. Jonah wasn't the devil either. Of course not. They were ordinary people, or pirates who ended up in situations where the devil turned them to his cause. In One Piece, in the Foxy Saga, Sanji explains to us that pirates call Davy back the act of taking what you want from your enemies and, for example, snatching their crewmates. This game is named Davy, probably after Davy Jones. So what is the original background of a Davy Back fight? Well, I'm gonna tell you what I suspect. I believe that the Davy Back fights were originally created to recover Davy. In other words, I sense that in ancient times, someone lost Davy Jones, lost his soul to a devil, and created this game to try to recover him. I have a very strong hunch here. I suspect that someone, perhaps Immu or someone with Immu's power in the past, took Davy Jones's soul in a game or a bet. It could have been literally a betting duel against the devil. That's why the Davy Back fights exist, to keep alive the possibility of reversing that outcome, to train and someday recover what was lost. As a curious note, there is an American song called "The Devil Went Down to Georgia," which is about a musician challenging the devil to a fiddle duel. If you have never heard it, I recommend it because it quite well describes the idea of beating the devil at his own game, very much in line with what I think Oda might be doing with this legend. The image I have is the following: Davy Jones challenged the Devil of the Sea to a game, a competition, a bet, and he lost. He lost something more valuable than life. He lost his soul, and as a consequence, he was forced to join the Devil's crew. Imagine it, Davy Jones and his crew facing a demonic being in a sort of legendary Davy Back fight, and Davy loses. And as punishment, he and perhaps part of his crew become enslaved by the devil. In the Legend of Pirates of the Caribbean, Davy Jones tore out his heart and kept it in a chest, thus distancing his soul from himself. In One Piece, it could be similar, but with a twist. Maybe it was the devil who tore out Davy Jones's soul and kept it somewhere, in Davy Jones's locker. In any case, the result is the same. The pirate Davy Jones ended up becoming the demon himself. Let's remember what Robin said, a pirate from long ago who was cursed by a demon, and what better curse than to become what you hated the most? It could be that Davy Jones was cursed, turning him into a demon under the control of the original devil. And we have even seen that with Zebeck, the same thing happened in God Valley, that he was turned into a demon by Immu with the Domi Reversi. Even the small reference by Sanji in the Foxy Saga makes me think. Sanji says that taking what you want from your enemies, pirates call it Davy Back Fight, and at the end of the Foxy Saga, they say that whoever breaks the rules of that game goes to Davy Jones's locker, meaning they lose their pirate soul. It all sounds like the game is very tied to Davy's story, and what would happen after Davy lost his soul? Well, I imagine that his crewmates, or the people who cared about him, wanted to recover it. The only way to recover your lost comrade was to play against the devil again and win. That's where the tradition of the Davy Back Fights would have come from. Pirates training and competing among themselves to one day be ready to challenge the devil again and recover Davy. Does it sound far-fetched? Well, think about how it fits in Pirates of the Caribbean. Davy Jones removes his heart, which is equivalent to losing the soul. He keeps it in the chest, his locker, or he himself becomes the devil of the sea. Well, in One Piece, the version would be that Davy Jones lost his soul in a game against the sea demon and ended up cursed as a demon. Davy Jones in One Piece probably challenged the sea devil to a game and lost, and as a consequence, he transformed into a demon, becoming just another pawn of the devil himself. Obviously, it's still an incomplete story because we're extrapolating a lot, but what a story! I hope this theory is entertaining for now and seems quite solid to you, at least as much as it does to me. At first, I asked myself the question, could Davy Jones actually have been Joy Boy? We know of two great legendary figures from the past, Joy Boy, the hero of the Void Century, and Davy Jones, this cursed pirate about whom we have some mentions, and it is logical to wonder if they could be the same. And so far, nothing I have said contradicts that possibility. It could be that Joy Boy and Davy Jones were the same person, but interpreted differently by history. But finally, in chapter 1164 of the One Piece manga, it has been revealed that they are two people, as Zebeck tells Emu if they fear Davy D more. Jones or Joy Boy. I'm going to propose something even crazier for you to really have something to think about. So far, my hypotheses have been relatively logical as far as they go, but hold on, because now comes the truly outrageous part of the theory. Let's remember, in Pirates of the Caribbean, the story of Davy Jones is a tragic love story. Davy Jones made a pact with the woman he loved, Calypso, and ended up feeling betrayed by her. But watch out, in the movies, Calypso didn't actually betray him with bad intentions. She confesses to Davy that she still loved him, but her wild and untamed nature forced her to be free, not to be tied down waiting 10 years for him. Basically, Calypso could not stop being free because freedom was her essence. Davy Jones, blinded by pain, interpreted it as an unforgivable betrayal and demonized her in his mind. But in reality, it was not exactly like that. There are interesting parallels here with One Piece. We could compare Calypso, that goddess of untamable freedom, with the idea of the sun god, Nika, the embodiment of freedom itself, even with Luffy himself. Calypso had a nature that could not be chained. Something like absolute freedom ruled her life. And what does Luffy represent if not freedom? Calypso did not wait for Davy Jones because she could not betray herself. She could not stop being free. Davy Jones, in his pain, perceived her as an evil traitor, like the devil of the sea. But in reality, he simply did not understand her nature. In One Piece, I think we will see something similar. Davy Jones probably became enemies with someone he cared about a lot, a friend, a loved one, maybe even his own captain, because he felt that person failed or betrayed him. But it may be that Davy was wrong, that he didn't understand the higher reason behind his friend's action. Let's go back to Jonah. It is easy to imagine that Jonah felt betrayed by God. God wanted to save the wicked people that Jonah believed unworthy of salvation. Perhaps Jonah even thought, why is God asking me for something so absurd? Is he playing with the devil by putting me in the middle of his game? Jonah might have come to believe that God himself was deceiving him or putting him on the devil's side for no apparent reason. And then Jonah, confused and angry, betrayed God by disobeying and fleeing. I would like to think that something similar happened in the story of Davy Jones in One Piece, that Davy Jones ended up confronting someone he deeply cared for or respected because he felt that person betrayed him first. Davy Jones made an enemy of someone very important to him, someone almost divine in his life. It could have been his captain, his best friend, or even his beloved, because he felt that person had betrayed him, although in reality he was mistaken and did not understand the full picture. So I propose this. Was Davy Jones actually Joy Boy? Or maybe he was someone from the era of Joy Boy who ate the Hito Hito fruit model Nika, the sun god, and was basically a parallel to Luffy? Personally, I don't think so, because as we mentioned before, in chapter 1164, these people are talked about as two different people. Similarly, we know how Oda is, we know how One Piece is, and Oda might surprise us by saying that simply Davy D. Jones was the name and Joy Boy the nickname, since Joy Boy literally means a joyful boy, and Davy D. Jones is a name. Likewise, for now, I choose to believe they are two different people because this is practically confirmed. We have to be careful with our assumptions. We have always thought, ah yes, he was a great pirate from the past. Surely he was a great captain, but what if he wasn't? Davy Jones could well have been the first mate of a crew, a member, not the leader. Maybe Davy Jones was part of Joy Boy's crew, even his right-hand man, and not the captain himself. Imagine that Davy Jones received a divine order in a way, an order from his captain, who for him was like a godly figure, especially if that captain had the fruit of the sun god, Nika, who was practically a divine envoy. And Davy Jones refused to carry out that order. He fled, feeling betrayed or outraged by what he had been asked. In terms of analogy, Davy Jones would be Jonah, his captain, Joy Boy would be the god or the son of God, the champion of the divine will at that time. Joy Boy with the Nika fruit and his mission to free the world would be that sun god giving orders, sometimes, that no one understands. If everything I'm saying were true, that pirate in that context is literally participating in a game, a cosmic game of betting against the devil. You are fighting against the devil, and what you risk is your freedom or your soul, your dreams. Once you enter the game, you cannot back out without consequences, because even if you manage to escape with your life, if you abandon it, you would have lost the most important thing in your life, your dream, your goal, which in this world is equivalent to losing your soul. The character Zoro himself makes his point of view clear. He would rather die than give up on his dreams. In fact, Eiichiro Oda himself said that Luffy does not kill his enemies because in the world of One Piece, and for Luffy himself, it is considered worse to destroy a person's dreams than to end their life. And that is what Luffy does with his enemies. And I don't just say this metaphorically, it's explicitly in the rules of the Davy Back fights in One Piece. There are 3 articles that define the defeat in that game. Number 1, any crew member captured during the game can only be recovered by playing again. There is no rescue by brute force. It has to be in the game itself. Number 2, the captured must swear immediate loyalty to the winning captain. That is, your will now belongs to the enemy. And number 3, a stolen flag can never be raised again. Losing your flag is losing your identity as a crew, and they warn that those who do not obey these rules will end up in Davy Jones's locker as a wretch. Translated, the one who breaks the rules loses their pirate soul and becomes cursed. It's not that they die instantly or anything, but it's worse. They are a pariah whose existence no longer has honor or purpose. A tormented soul, metaphorically dead in life. It sounds like going to Davy Jones's locker is like condemning yourself to that purgatory we talked about. So what do I think happened to Davy Jones? That he didn't play by the rules. I think Davy Jones, after arguing with his captain Joy Boy, or whoever his divine friend was, left the crew in the middle of that game against the devil they had going on. He broke the most sacred rules of pirate camaraderie, and that's why he suffered a fate worse than death. And well, this would be the end of the video. I think we've reviewed and discussed all the most important things about Davy Jones, Joy Boy, the Void Century, and everything. And above all, I think we've done very well following the clues that Oda has left us. Likewise, as always, I want you to leave in the comments everything you think about this theory. If you have an idea, if you dismiss something, if there's something I haven't mentioned that you think I've overlooked and you want to leave it in the comments, leave it in the comments. Also, as always, you can debate among yourselves, because you always do, and you are very respectful, which I appreciate a lot. And tell you that if you liked the video, you can leave a big like, subscribe to the channel,